Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello there and good morning to you. Happy Friday. Although I tell you what, I don't know who forgot to turn on the lights outside. I just nicked that from Mark Dolan. He said that during our little handover. But it's grim out there. It's bleak. It's almost apocalyptic. I hope there's at least 1% of UV where you are. A little bit of vitamin D for the soul. But unfortunately in London, well, we're sort of clouded. We're sort of festooned with smog this morning, which doesn't particularly feel very cheery. But I'm going to try and do my best to bring a little bit of sunshine on an otherwise dark, miserable day. I think it's Storm Gloria, right, who's about to sort of land in the United Kingdom with a gazillion inches of rain in 10 hours or whatever the metric is. So good luck, Noah. I hope you've got enough pine wood to build a new ark. Who would you be putting on that? Who would make the ark and who would not? That is not the game we are going to play today. But I do want your thoughts on other things, especially the stories we're going to be talking about. If you would like to give a girl a call and, I don't know, cheer her up a bit on a cloudy day, the number is 0344 499 1000. I do love speaking to you, so even if it's just to have a good old moan, you know what we call that, you and I? We call it communal catharsis, and it's your normal network rate. So you know what that means as well. That means it's the same as calling your nan, and you haven't done that in an awfully long time, and she also does not like this weather, so cheer her up as well. 87222 is the number if you'd like to send me a text message. If you're going to do that, write the word talk before you text, and as regular listeners already know, the 03444 99 1000 number can also be used to send a WhatsApp or leave me a voice note, a voicio, a little 1 minute of minute respite for me in the studio to instead listen to something wonderful that you have recorded. So don't be coy. Get on board HMS Common Sense, ahoy. Right. OK, without any more ridiculous Alex rhyming slang, let's get on with getting on, shall we? Because we're joined by the inimitable, the brilliant Brendan O'Neill, Chief Political Writer at Spiked Online. Good morning, Brendan.
Hi, Alex. How's it going?
Not too bad. I mean, looking out there, it's hard to feel happy, but we're going to do our best because nothing is more pleasurable than a bit of Schadenfreude. And certainly from the sort of cool comfort of this studio, looking at what's going on to Auntie has put a little wry smile on my face because, as you know, it was the 11th hour today. The BBC were expected to make a big formal apology to President Trump, offer some form of compensation which wasn't enumerated. And so they've put together a mealy-mouthed, we made a mistake. It's like, you're lying again, BBC. You keep lying, don't you? And now we found out that BBC Newsnight also edited Donald Trump's speech. Why can't the BBC turn around and go, do you know what? Most of our staff are really prejudiced against right-wingery. They despise Donald Trump, and so they thought they could take editorial matters into their own hands. Why can't they just be honest and say mea culpa?
You know, the BBC still doesn't understand how big this crisis is. They think they can fix it by shuffling some people at the top, by making a little apology to Donald Trump, by trying to avoid paying him any money. All of those things are immaterial in comparison with the size of this crisis facing the public broadcaster, because we now know, everyone in this country now knows that the BBC is an incredibly biased institution, that it is more interested in representing the crazy ideology of the elites than it is in telling the truth. We know it was infused with anti-Trump mania. It's promoted the trans lie, the trans nonsense. It told so many lies about Gaza, they'd had to issue, on average, 2 apologies, 2 corrections every week since 7th of October 2023. This is an institution completely corrupted by ideology. And I think all the stuff it's currently doing is it's shuffling deck chairs on the Titanic. It's not going to fix the serious problems in this institution.
How is how is it that journalists in what is our sort of flagship state broadcast are so divorced from facts? I mean, look, I can understand that a lot of the liberal elites who end up in our profession have very different politics to you and I. We know that exists, but surely they should be able to leave their personal views at the door and regard things as facts. And they seem to sit there thinking, well, Donald Trump is a monster. Everyone must be able to see that he is a monster. Clearly, we can put this together because we're going to show people that he's a monster. It's a bit like an archaeologist. Instead of uncovering remains and go, I wonder who this might be, sticking the bits of the skeleton back together and going, oh, look, that's Richard III underneath a car park, saying, right, we're going to dig this and we're going to find Julius Caesar, and whatever skelly bod they come across, they declare it's Julius Caesar. It is the opposite of what the profession is all about. And surely the BBC must be able to see that. If I can see it, if you can see it, if everybody who's right-minded can see it, why is it the BBC can't see it? Or is it that they can, they just don't want to be cured of their errors?
I think they can't, which is far scarier. And if you look at all the people who've been defending the BBC, which includes some BBC journalists, some ex-BBC journalists, lots of the kind of chattering classes, the news agents, you know, all these people who are obsessed with the BBC, they think it's the best thing since sliced bread. They've all been defending it. They are all completely delusional. They really genuinely believe that the BBC is the pinnacle of impartiality. It doesn't have an ideological bone in its body. They live on another planet. And that's precisely the problem. The BBC exists within its own bubble. It's got its own political, moral bubble. It's very difficult for anyone with alternative ways of thinking to break through that bubble, to bring in the views of the public, the views of the kind of Brexit voting, migration concerned public. That never gets a look in at the BBC. So because it's cut itself off from the real world, it's cut itself off from the public it's supposed to represent, it's become ever more eccentric and crazy and convinced that it's doing good when in fact it's doing bad. The great irony, of course, is that for the past few years, the BBC has presented itself as an island of truth in the swirling seas of misinformation. We now know for a fact that the BBC was promoting misinformation. It lied about Donald Trump. It lied about the idea that this man is a woman. In all its news reports, it frequently referred to men as women. It lied about Gaza and Israel so often that it had to make all these apologies. It was a font of misinformation presenting itself as the pinnacle of truth. That's what's really been exposed by this.
I think also it has arrogance. I used to work at the BBC, and you know, this has made me reflect on that period quite a lot. I worked in a particular newsroom that will remain unnamed, and I can remember sitting in editorial meetings proffering what I thought were very sensible suggestions at how the news should be covered, and the response was always, well, you can't do that, we're not going to do it that way. And actually I was mocked and derided and treated like a complete outsider. And this was back in 2009, and I left. I was in some sort of trainee scheme, this VIP traineeship, which was supposed to be the conveyor belt to stardom at the BBC. I left after 6 months. I found it intolerable. I threw essentially the career I always wanted, that I'd gone to postgraduate school to train for, down the drain. Such was my revulsion with the BBC. So I know what it's like from the inside. And one thing I'd say is most people at the BBC strut about with their BBC pass thinking we are the best. Because we work at the BBC, we are brilliant. We're the world leaders. And, you know, I've got to the stage now where I almost punitively want to scrap the licence fee, even though there's a big part of me today that goes, well, if the BBC can be saved, what a wonderful diplomatic asset, what brilliant geopolitical leverage it is to have the BBC, if it works properly. What do you think could save it? What would be the medicine to help the BBC?
It's such a good question. You know, I'm not a traditional BBC basher. I've got a million criticisms of it, but I'm not one of those people who says defund the BBC, cancel the BBC, get rid of the BBC. I have so many fond memories of the BBC from when I was a kid. Thursday nights watching Top of the Pops, David Attenborough's documentaries, of course, and the news. The news used to be really good and pretty impartial, but that's all changed over the past 10 years or so. I think Brexit was a part of this. I think the BBC lost its mind after Brexit. It went completely doolally, as a lot of the chattering classes did. They can't believe that the Oiks voted leave when they told us not to. I think that was a contributing factor to the BBC becoming more ideological, thinking that it had to correct the masses rather than inform the masses, kind of change the way we think rather than tell us what's going on in the world. It became incredibly paternalistic in that period. But, you know, everyone's now saying, let's feel sorry for the BBC. And I do think there's a question to answer about how we might save it, what we might do. But I'm sorry, I have very little sympathy for what they've done, for the mistakes they've made, the errors they've done, the misrepresentations they've given us. I'm going to reserve my sympathy for the women and the young gay people who were so badly harmed by the trans ideology that the BBC did so much to mainstream. I'm going to reserve my sympathy for Britain's Jews, who were really harmed by the pox of Israelophobia that the BBC did so much to spread over the past 2 years. So I'm not going to feel sorry for the BBC. I'm going to feel sorry for those members of the public who were directly harmed by the ideologies the BBC foisted on us, and that's what we should be talking about.
I think we also need to, I'm thinking about it then, reflecting on it, we need to discuss the culture of fear at the BBC, because it's interesting, the response to this crisis from those people outside throwing in their two bits who aren't from the sensible side of politics, let's say, I think especially of Sir Ed Davey, who in response to this crisis said, well, we mustn't let the BBC be overtaken by the likes of Reform UK and Donald Trump, and Sir Robbie Gibb, who used to be Director of Communications in 10 Downing Street, who was a brilliant head of BBC Westminster for the longest of times, who now sits on the board. He must be sacked. What? The problem is not with the BBC, some sort of overbearing right wing. The problem is everyone who is a little bit Brexity or might be on the right wing of politics at the BBC dare not voice it. They dare not speak of centrist politics or a right-wing viewpoint for fear of being rejected, ostracised, mocked, bullied. I worked there. I can attest to that. There is a culture of fear at the BBC that if you are not a lefty liberal, you are going to be treated badly. And that is utterly appalling.
Absolutely. It's become its own club, and it's closed itself off to the thinking of a huge number of ordinary Brits. That's the precise problem with the BBC, and you're absolutely right. I know people who work at the BBC who feel that they can't express themselves freely in the newsroom and in the workplace. I've never worked for the BBC, but I've been there many times. And even I have felt a little bit shamefaced about the things I'm going there to say, which, by the way, is just stuff like, let's get Brexit done. Yeah. Or, you know, let's not exaggerate the threat of climate change. Even I feel, oh, no, I have to say this in front of all these people. And they look down their noses at you. They absolutely expressly look down their noses at you for holding those perfectly normal opinions. But I think, you know, the issue is that the public broadcaster has become an anti-public broadcaster. It now looks upon ordinary people with contempt. That's the truth of the matter, and that's the thing that's the rot that is eating away at the BBC. It was invented with high aspirations to serve the public, inform the public, enlighten the public, give us good entertainment, good news, good culture. It was about helping the public, really. Now it's about changing us, transforming us, telling us off constantly for being too white, supposedly too privileged, too Brexity. It's become this hectoring, paternalistic institution, and changing that is going to take an awful lot more than getting rid of some of the bigwigs at the top.
I couldn't agree more. It's so up its own backside, it's time to be brought down a peg or two. Let's talk now about Shabana Mahmood, who is saying she's going to force judges to prioritise public safety over the rights of illegal migrants in a crackdown on asylum claims. Now, that sounds all very good and well. That sounds like a sort of slither of common sense coming out of the Cabinet Office. And yet, my big question is, how are you going to do this, Shabana? Because as far as I can tell, most people in the Labour Party get down on their knees, prostrate in front of leftist judges and international law, and we mustn't interfere with their viewpoints. How is she now going to turn around and tell judges, oh, well, by the way you're applying the ECHR needs to change? I don't think they're going to take that instruction.
Absolutely not. It's the similar thing to the BBC, isn't it? The idea that you can just change a few things and everything will be fine. No, there's a deeper infrastructural problem, and it starts with the ECHR, and it starts with lots of other international treaties that we are bound to, and which have an impact on what we are allowed to do as a sovereign nation. The ECHR empowers our judiciary, our increasingly politicized judiciary, to act in a way that is counter to the interests of the government and counter to the interests of the British public. That's the truth of it. I think her heart is in the right place. I think she is saying something that will go down well with the public, and they want to hear this kind of thing, and they want it to be done. But whether Labour is capable of doing this is another question entirely. Because if you are not willing to withdraw us from the ECHR, if you're not willing to rethink refugee treaties and other things like this, which compel us to take certain people in, compel us to give them food and board, which we don't have to do with British citizens, by the way. We're bound to all these international treaties, which give people who arrive on boat, as you can see on your screens now, gives them more rights to basic necessities than people who were born in the United Kingdom. This is the travesty of the situation we find ourselves in, and it is fundamentally down to these parliament undermining international treaties and bodies that we are subscribed to. We've got to remove ourselves from so much of that.
Isn't it sort of sad and supine and weak for the Labour Party to say, oh, we're going to go see what they're doing in Denmark, therefore, because we're copying a Scandinavian country with a left-wing government, we can actually do something that's in the public interest because someone else has dared do it before us. It is pathetic. It is pathetic that they have to look to another nation entirely and imitate or copycat little bits of what they're doing rather than look at the bespoke situation in the United Kingdom, simply so they can hide behind the fact that we're still left-wing because someone else left-wing is doing it. Grow up!
Yeah, I think what the Social Democrats in Denmark are doing is very interesting, and lots of people in Europe are looking at it. But you're absolutely right. Britain is a completely different case. We're geographically, we're different. In terms of size, we're different. In terms of the extent of the problem of mass immigration, we're different. We've got vast, vast numbers of people coming here, some illegally, some legally, in a way that the British public is sick and tired of. And no, that doesn't make them xenophobic. It doesn't mean they want to shut down all immigration. It just means they think a sovereign nation should have control of its borders, and the people should judge who comes here and who doesn't. And until we have that right, we're not a democratic nation. But you're right, we need to come up with our own solutions. We need good, hard and fast solutions to deal with this problem, because mass immigration is the thing that's really ticking off the British public right now, and we need to get a handle on it.
I mean, it's pathetic. First of all, it's like we're going to go see what Georgia Maloney's doing because she's using Albania. We're going to go see what Denmark's doing because they're left-wing and we might be able to get away with it. What about sitting down and coming up with a plan? That is why you are a cabinet minister. I just find it so skin-crawlingly, ridiculously weak. Let's talk now about the Metropolitan Police, who are now investigating tens of grooming gang cases. The initial data search has identified 9,000 historic cases. 9,000. I mean, this is appalling. I always think back to that mayoral question time where the leader of the Conservatives, Susan Hall, was saying to Sadiq Khan, do we have grooming gangs in London? If they're everywhere else in the country, we're going to have them in the capital city, right? And the games he played, the way he goaded her, the arrogance with which he was trying to prod her to say the word Pakistani or Asian so he could point an accusatory finger and call her a racist made me livid. It was one of the most disgusting things I've ever seen in politics. It horrifies me to this day. And yet, here we go. The case in point, the evidence here is there are grooming gangs in London. Of course there are. Why on earth would there not be? And thousands of victims will have been disabused of the right to protection and to justice because of one man's Jupiter-sized ego and his will to play sad little identity politics games. It really makes me sick to the stomach.
You know, the way Sadiq Khan behaved when he was asked about grooming gangs earlier this year was repulsive. I mean, it really, actually, it summed up the whole grooming gang or rape gang crisis, which is that politicians just don't want to talk about this. And in fact, he did something even worse. He showed that he was more interested in being able to call a conservative racist than he was in protecting working class girls from abuse and rape. His priority in that moment was, how can I get one over on the Tory? How can I say, oh, you're racist, you're Islamophobic? How can I make myself look good and virtuous, rather than thinking, how can I protect girls in this city of which I am mayor from being raped by gangs? What a twisted set of moral priorities he has, and that was so exposed in that moment. And I think as we find out more about grooming gangs in London, of course there are grooming gangs here, it's impossible that there isn't. In fact, the more we find out about them, the more I think that will be his legacy. That when this was raised in front of him, the mayoral offices, his first response was to slyly try and play the race card, to filibuster, to try and expose someone else. What a complete and utter abandonment of the moral responsibilities of the mayor of London. But, you know, it's the same story. Working class girls are being sacrificed on the altar of political correctness. That's what the whole rape gang crisis has been about. I have no doubt whatsoever that that happened in London too. This is the worst this is the worst crisis of the post-war era, and we really need to get a handle on it.
I totally agree. Now, I've got to say the response of the Mayor of London to all of this. He has promised to be completely transparent when it comes to reviewing potential cases of child sexual exploitation. Sadiq Khan has said grooming gangs in the capital are far more complex than those uncovered in other towns across England. It's interesting, isn't it, Brendan, that all of a sudden the announcement has come that they're going to be scrapping police and crime commissioners, which I always thought was a bit of a waste of time appointment anyway. But when it comes to the Met Police, who holds that role? Oh, yeah. It's the Mayor of London. How convenient that all of a sudden, when the buck has to stop somewhere, it's no longer going to stop with him.
Yeah, you know, I just can't believe he's still Mayor of London, if I'm being perfectly honest with you. And he walks around thinking that he's, you know, this wonderful anti-Brexit, kind of PC, wonderfully woke politician, not understanding how profoundly unpopular he is. You know, one of my all-time favourite facts is that more people in London voted for Brexit than ever voted for Sadiq Khan. And this is something that we should always bear in mind, that even though Brexit was not the majority vote in London, still more Londoners voted for that than have ever voted for Sadiq. He's a useless mayor. He's rubbish. He's turned London into a soapbox for his own personal politics, his own woke preening, his own desire to constantly say trans women are women and Islamophobia is the real scourge of our nation, and don't talk about grooming gangs because you might sound racist. That's what he's turned London into, a kind of showboating exercise for himself. We need a mayor in office who's able to understand the profound problems facing our city and not one who just uses the city for his own moral gain. I think that's outrageous.
I couldn't agree more. Thank you ever so much, the brilliant Brendan O'Neill, Chief Political Writer at Spiked Online. OK, now, if you would like to throw in your 2 bits on anything we've been talking about today, I would love to hear from you. 0344 499 1000. So that's actually 0344 99 1000 is the number to dial if you'd like to have a chinwag with me, and I would love to have a conversation with you. It's your normal network rate, and if you want to keep text coming in, it's 87222, like talk before your message, and you can use the 03444 99 1000 number as well to send me a WhatsApp. Coming up after the break, that's what we're going to do. We're going to all get together and talk about today's stories. So I'll see you just after this.
Big news coming this December. Our talkTV app is moving to the Talk app. You can watch, catch up and listen to all your favourite shows and podcasts anytime, anywhere, all on the Talk app. From Monday, 1st of December, the talkTV app will no longer exist, so don't miss out. So head over to your App Store or Google Play and search Talk now.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello there, welcome back. Now, as promised, it's time for us to have a chit-chat with you. So let's get on with getting on, shall we? Let's first of all speak to Stuart, who is in Wigan. Good morning, Stuart.
Hi, Alex.
Hello, my love.
I just want to talk about the BBC on Labour, if I can. The BBC needs shutting down. I don't want to save the BBC at all. I want it shutting down. I want a big investigation on everybody that works for the BBC and everyone, because as far as I can see, they've never met a terrorist they don't love. They've never met a paedophile they don't love. And everybody that covered up for the likes of Jimmy Savile and everybody else shouldn't be getting the pension. They should be getting sent down.
I mean, let's talk about the matter in hand here, because I don't want to start venturing into, having sympathy for paedophiles and things like that. It's 10:30 in the morning now, Stuart. But do you not think that one thing that's annoyed me about all of this is we're not hearing the name of the editor of Panorama, right? No one's talking about, it's Karen someone. No one's talking about her and what's gone on with her and if her career's been wrecked by this. But, most other broadcasting stations, if you were to make that sort of a heinous error, it's not even an error, is it? You'd be the one name, shame, fired, and see your career as a journalist probably come to an untimely end. But do you not think, because, look, I'm going to level with you here, Stuart. You must have heard, I've got my huge grievances with the BBC. I worked there and I still feel slightly traumatised by it, if I'm honest with you. It was grotesque. And having been a Brexit Party MEP and, I still go and do things for Newsnight and Politics Live now, what Brendan O'Neill was saying, when you walk into the BBC, you feel ashamed of yourself because you know that you're the disgusting, dirty, horribly, right-wing monster that everybody else is judging. And yet I get on with getting on anyway. And I would still say if the BBC can be sorted out, it's a brilliant asset to have.
Well, I don't agree, to be honest. I really don't agree and I also don't agree because if people like that if people like who work for the BBC do like me, I'm not being true to myself.
Yeah.
I don't want people like that to like me. I'm very unhappy if they do.
I mean, what we need to do, surely, is make sure that the BBC doesn't really have people like that. And how you go about this, I think, is actually quite simple. The BBC is one giant blob of elitism. Everyone's been on the same conveyor belt through the same path through education. When it comes to trying to broaden the scope of staff at the BBC, it's all DEI. It's what colour is your skin? What is your sexuality? It is identity politics. What the BBC is utterly failing to do is give working class kids from the normal streets of Britain the opportunity to go and be part of the nation's voice. Those people are deliberately excluded and ostracised from Auntie, which is why what we have is a chorus of people who don't seem to reflect whatsoever the general mood of the public.
But it sounds to me like you're arguing for me.
Yeah, well, no, but this is what I think. I think if the BBC turn around and have more schemes to get kids from Wigan working in the corridors of power, then it might look and feel a lot better.
That'd scare them there.
Stuart, thank you ever so much for your call. Let's speak now to Tarquin in London. Good morning, Tarquin.
Darling, how are you? You're doing a great job.
Oh, why, thank you very much. Tell that to the BBC. They might be needing to hire a few right-wingers shortly.
Well, I said to your producer a moment ago, I am a lot more fundamental than you, possibly even than the great Alex Phillips, because I want to see that abomination abolished, Alex. And I want it to change from the bombastic Bolshevism cartel into the British Brexit content. They have to change it from top to bottom. They must get a royal charter in, banish it. It's like a virus. It is a mind virus. You have to destroy the virus at the root. You can't nip a few buds and expect it to grow back the way. No, isn't going to happen, love. We've got to get rid. Start from scratch, brand new production companies, brand new independent media firms. There's loads of them all over Media City. Sadly, a lot of those have been Bolshevized and Fabianized. You see, you're riddled with Fabians in that place and common purpose. You've got to get them out. And they start at the bottom because the kids are being indoctrinated. So you've got the young inductees like you. They were trying to, brainwash you, like back in the day. That's what they will continue to do. And let me just finish on this one. They've got that much time. This Donald Trump quote thing. On YouTube, everybody, get on YouTube because there's a segment on there by the Daily T, the graphic designer on Newsnight. And if you know about this, hope this is old news, but BBC Newsnight 3 years ago edited the same quote slightly differently, and they got away with it. So
exactly. I mean, look, this is just exactly what the BBC do. I've seen the curation of narratives in the newsrooms of the BBC with my own eyes. Although, Tarquin, I do actually have a solution. I personally think that what should happen is the Director General of the BBC should be directly elected, no taxation without representation. A manifesto of would-be candidates should be made available to all of those who pay the licence fee, and that way be forced to represent the British public. There should be no DEI, but there needs to be schemes to make sure the working classes of Britain get to become journalists, because that is the mechanism by which the likes of people like Rod Liddell became brilliant editors of the BBC, people who actually uphold the nation's values. And I also think we should be using AI technology to audit the content of the BBC, because if they can sit there doing checkbox exercises to how many people are BAME, how many people are, non-cis, heterosexual, how many people, all of that rubbish, if they are capable of keeping tallies, and they do, of every single guest and what their particular identity is, which box they fit into, then they should be capable of equally keeping an audit of partiality. Tarquin, thank you ever so much for your call. And thank you to your messages. Keep them coming in. I'll read a few more a bit later. 0344 499 1000 number to WhatsApp, or to call now and register your interest to speak to me a bit later on. 87222 is the number if you'd like to send me a text like talk before your message. We're going to take a break now, and then we're going to be discussing that why hasn't politics changed since the days of Oliver Cromwell. I meant Thomas Cromwell, who, of course, infamously was executed for being the sort of right-hand man of Henry VIII. And, it's a theme that keeps going on and on and on and on in politics. And the big question now is that what is going to happen in number 10 Downing Street? We're discussing that with a Labour councillor and commentator after this.
Across the UK. On DAB+. On YouTube. On your mobile. And on your side. This is Talk.
Hello and welcome back. Now, what is going on in the Labour Party? It looks like a pretty dismal record in power so far for Sir Keir Starmer. And the tears are showing in the operation at number 10 Downing Street. It's all good and well when things are going well, but as soon as the proverbial hits the fan, heads must roll. And there's been a lot of finger pointing, a lot of faction fighting going on in number 10 Downing Street, similar to that in the Conservative Party of old. And it's a narrative as old as time. I remember, of course, under Theresa May, her two right-hand man and women lost their jobs when her premiership seemed to hit the skids. The same thing, of course, Dominic Cummings, who would rid me of that troublesome priest. And now it seems that Morgan McSweeney is the person who all the blame is being laid at his doorstep for toxic briefings and leaks and games. What's going on? Is it just that because everything's going so badly, people are looking for someone to throw overboard? Or is it that actually, in the face of political reality, the Labour Party is suddenly realising that they have people who are just not up to the job? Let's speak now to Sebastian Salek, Labour councillor and commentator. I mean, look, this is politics all over, isn't it? And people say this is a Westminster bubble story. But it's quite clear to me that the operation in 10 Downing Street is in crisis. When you actually do the roll call of the number of people who have essentially lost their jobs already, and it's only just over 1 year that the Labour Party's been in power, the retention of staff isn't looking very good, is it? As a Labour councillor who has to go out and defend this stuff, how do you feel?
I mean, I just speak my mind. One thing I am quite annoyed about is the sense of the briefing. I think we need unity for the party and for the country, frankly. The most important thing we need now is for the government to be able to go ahead and to deliver on its agenda. Whether you agree with Labour, whether you agree with Starmer, I think we can all agree that what we need is a Prime Minister who sticks around more than 2 or 3 years, which we certainly haven't had since David Cameron. We're going way back to 2015, 2016, since we had somebody who'd been in office long enough to start to implement what they'd been elected to do.
I mean, things aren't going to get easier, are they, with the forthcoming budget? It seems to me that, the problem the Labour Party's got at the moment, quite frankly, is the medicine the country needs is not anything that's cooked up in the Labour Party pharmacy, is it? What we need is, a growth agenda probably involving tax cuts. What we need is cuts to the welfare state as well. What we need is a firm hand on immigration. These things are all sort of, completely opposite to what most left-wing ideology is. And unfortunately, unless Sir Keir Starmer or indeed Rachel Reeves delivers such medicine in the forthcoming budget, the country's economy is going to really hit the doldrums in a significant way. And yet, it's alleged that a number of backbench MPs could go on strike to defy the government and are fuming at being called feral. I mean, he's stuck between a rock and a hard place, isn't he? There's a political reality of what he needs to do, and all of the Labour backbenchers who live in la-la land, who thinks Marxism's going to save the country at a time of economic crisis, are going to make his job incredibly hard by agitating against the very thing he needs to do to save this country.
Well, I think you're right to put your finger on the fact that the operation in number 10 is being extremely pragmatic when it comes to the economy. I don't think there's ideology at play. I think really it is in their political interest to do whatever it takes, to borrow a phrase from the great Mario Draghi, to get the economy back on its feet. Now, look, there will always be people, usually on the right, who will use this opportunity to make the case for tax cuts. If that worked, if that's what it took, I would be advocating for it as well. I just don't see how that is a route forward because, as always, if you give people a little bit of a discount on their tax bill, you've got to pay for that elsewhere. There doesn't seem to be a clear.
Is it not more about aiding, abetting growth by actually cutting things like the welfare state, getting people back into work, getting Britain productive again, cutting red tape and bureaucracy? And we know that the IMF at one point was going to completely trash our ratings and say, look, you know, that the UK should be put under special measures, as they essentially suggested France should be. But they didn't, because the welfare bill was supposed to be going through Parliament, which of course was blocked by backbenchers, because they said, no, we can't get rid of things like disability allowances and motability and people who are off work for 2 years because they feel a little bit sad or whatever it may be. That this is the area that the Labour Party are going to have to tackle because it's unsustainable. But unfortunately, the political cost could potentially be too high for the Prime Minister. And so he's stuck between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah, I think we'd probably agree partly on welfare. I mean, there is something to be done there in terms of cutting the bill. It's clearly too high. We're spending a lot. But at the same time, what does it tell us that there are so many people who are asking for support? I'm really pleased this week we've seen Alan Milburn, the former health secretary, be asked to start a review to see why so many people, so many young people, aren't in education or training, which is one of the key issues. A lot of them are saying, look, I'm just not feeling very well, whether that's physical or mental. And I think the compassionate and frankly economically sensible thing to do is to ask why and try and get into those underlying issues so we can fix them and make sure that the people who can work and want to work, and I think those people are broadly the same group, can get on and do that.
Is it not compassionate navel-gazing to keep asking why? What you do is just make sure if people aren't at work for any very provable reason that they don't get benefits and so they have to go to work. I mean, to me, it's very easy. You can't just sit there wringing your hands going, oh no, what's going on? Sort the problem out instead. Sebastian, thank you ever so much. Sebastian Salek, their Labour councillor and commentator. Right, we're going to take a short break now. If you want to comment on anything we've been talking about thus far this morning, please do throw in your 2-bit, the number to dial 0344499 1000 if you'd like to register your interest to speak to me over the phone. I'd love that. Normal network rate and all that. You can also use that number to send me a WhatsApp message or leave me a voice note. 87222 is the number if you'd like to text me. Write the word talk before you text. I'm going to take a short break now, but when we come back, we're going to be talking about whether policing can be saved. Yet another public institution that seems constantly in crisis. Scrapping police and crime commissioners. OK, good. Is that going to help matters? We're going to be discussing all of that with Norman Brennan, former police officer, just after this.
Big news coming this December. Our talkTV app is moving to the Talk app. You can watch, catch up and listen to all your favourite shows and podcasts anytime, anywhere, all on the Talk app. From Monday, 1st of December, the talkTV app will no longer exist, so don't miss out. So head over to your App Store or Google Play and search Talk now.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Oh, the cop shop, eh? It's really in a load of trouble. They've been closing a load of cop shops around London. Just the time when everyone's stabbing each other up on the mean streets of the capital. And they're like, what do we need police stations for anyway? As well as scrapping police stations, apparently now Labour are going to be scrapping police and crime commissioners. I mean, I kind of don't think they're going to be missed. Maybe I'm wrong. Let's speak now to Norman Brennan, who is a former police officer. Norman, I remember when these appointments were first brought in, which felt like yesterday, I was kind of like, why do we need elected officials in that role? Surely we've got the chiefs of various police forces and they're the ones where the buck stopped. Why have a politician overseeing that? Do you think it's a good idea to get rid of PCCs?
Yeah, good morning, Alex. Well, police crime commissioners were brought in to be an independent view and overview of policing. They also should have been the voice and the ears of victims of crime and the public in the force area. And their main job was to set aims and objectives for the particular police force that they oversaw. And that ultimately they can hire or fire a chief constable. So basically, a force should have been held to account by these police crime commissioners. They were brought in 2012 by Theresa May. It was the second worst thing that she did. The first one was to cripple policing by almost 20,000 police officers. So combining both of those together today, we've got a country where the police have lost control of the streets. So that just shows you how incompetent and how useless police crime commissioners were. And the main concern here, Alex, is this. It's the public, when they were surveyed prior to PCCs being implemented, 76% of them said they would prefer a retired police officer, someone like myself, to do that job. Do you know how many retired police officers are doing that? Zero. Each and every single one are a politician. So policing is now overseen by, guess who? Politics. Politics should never be within policing.
I always think it's astonishing that it's very clear and very easy to see what would sort out crime in the UK. You know it, I know it, everyone listening to this knows it, which is get officers out from behind desks where they're sitting there investigating tweets and wearing lanyards and taking the knee and all that rubbish, and let them go out and actually arrest wrong-uns. That surely, and in this day and age, you know, I was reading today that we're probably one of the most surveilled states on planet Earth. There's one single camera for every 10 people in the United Kingdom. So there's all of this new technology that could be used, and yet being able to solve crime seems like an impossibility. Shabana Mahmood is saying much needed reform will move officers back where they belong. Well, that's great. But I've heard this for years and years and years now, and for some reason it never seems to happen. What's going on?
Well, I'll tell you what we need, Alex, is we need 20,000 more police officers. That is just since the population growth of 2009. We haven't got any. We were recently told a big fib about 13,000 more officers. They're not 13,000 more officers. They're 5,000, or police officers. They are 5,000 PCSOs. They have limited power. They're not warranted. 5,000 were special constables. Special constables work free of charge and limited hours, i.e. 4 a week. and the other 3,000 officers to make up the 13,000, that are none of them are new, are 3,000 serving officers that are being taken away from beleaguered departments. So basically, we have a country, from when I joined the police service in 1978, we attended every call. We spoke to victims. We spoke to the public. The public shared information with us and they felt reassured. And like you have said on a number of occasions, where are the police? They're not about anymore. The way to bring the public and the police back are the 9 Pelian principles, and that is the police are the public are the police. Now, when you criticise the police, it's really the public we should be criticising, because the public are the ones that we get them from. So my overview of the criminal justice system and policing, and I've been in the job almost 50 years, I'm a lead independent spokesperson on policing. I'm a victims champion and I care passionately about public safety. My answer is this, and it's not a good one. We have at least 15 years of hell on the streets of Britain. The government can't protect our borders, they can't protect our streets, they can't protect us on public transport, and we don't see police officers. The merry-go-round goes round and round and round, and until we break that circle and the police and the public re-engage like we once did decades ago, I'm afraid we've got a very bleak outlook for the future. And PCCs going is just one of the problems and one of the issues that rightly should be dealt with. But who's going to oversee policing now?
Well, it's a very interesting question, actually. And you were saying how there's been too much of a politicisation of the police, and I couldn't agree more. Frankly speaking, why police are arresting people for tweets, we talk about it all the time. It's like a broken record. Why are these cops appearing on my Ring doorbell because I put something in a WhatsApp group? It is numbskullery, to say the least. It is a dreadful waste of police resources. So is the idea of two-tier policing. You know, people should actually see the police officer and treat them with a sort of reverence and respect and a degree of fear, quite frankly. If people think that they can get the upper hand by shouting the word "Waithist" at a police officer, then they're not going to be deterred from committing a crime. So how do we depoliticise the police? Because it's one thing saying we need to throw more money at the situation. We need to have more police officers on the beat. I couldn't agree more. But it's kind of hard, actually, getting into the mechanics or the psyche of an institution. We were discussing the BBC earlier, and actually rewiring that. How could that be done?
If I was the Home Secretary and knowing policing inside out and the law inside out, I'm a member of the public now. I've been a victim of crime. I deal with victims every day of the week, and I oversee homicide, gun and knife crime, major crime. If you wanted an expert opinion that's a member of the public, we need 2,000 new officers immediately, and we need them to be split into 8 groups of 250. Each and every single one public order trained. We need dog units on that section, armed officers. And what we need to do is all those 8 units strategically placed around Britain hit villages, towns and cities consistently. You never know when they're going to turn up. The police intelligence and all the collator's bulletins will say where there are issues. Shoplifters and everyone like that, it's a bit like the broken window syndrome. They hit the country like nobody's ever seen before. And the only way for that to work, Alex, is for the criminal justice system, that's our magistrates and judges, to back up them units. The circle, I'm afraid, will go round and round, and I repeat again, and I don't say this lightly, and I'm ashamed to say it. The policing in Britain is broken, our criminal justice system is broken, and I don't see any light at the end of the tunnel unless we invest in protecting society. And you talk and I talk every day of the week about migrants coming into this country that murder us, that rape our women, that attack our children. How the hell could that ever be acceptable? Detain them at sea and document them at sea, and within 24 hours, fly them out. Why is that so difficult to understand and comprehend? It's beyond me, and I'm quite a logical bloke.
Do you know what? It's beyond me as well, Norman. I think it's beyond most people listening to this, and it makes me despair. I hate the fact it's becoming normalised to open the newspaper and read about yet another woman raped by a migrant, yet another migrant shoplifting, murdering, breaking into our country, and yet being beatified. It makes me sick to my stomach. Norman Brennan, thank you ever so much. OK, we're going to be taking a short break now, but despair not, because I'm going to be with you for the next 2 hours, and there's so much more to talk about. So don't go anywhere. Put the kettle on or whatever it is that you're going to do in the next minute or so, and I'll see you on the other side.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello there and welcome back to the show. It's a bit gloomy out there, isn't it? My eyes just caught one of the screens above me here where they're doing the weather reports, and it seems to me like 90% of the rain of the world is going to be dumped upon the fair city of Gloucester, which is where I am from. And there's a reason, right, why there's that old adage, that old nursery rhyme, whatever you want to call it, you know, Dr. Foster went to Gloucester in a puddle of rain, or stepped in a puddle right up to his middle, and something or the other was never seen again. Because as soon as you see a weather warning, I instantly think of my parents and think, at what point do they need to build a boat? So if that's you and there's flood warnings where you are, you have my utmost sympathy, because having grown up on a floodplain, I know what it's like. And it's those poor old pubs are going to be thinking, am I going to have to get out the sandbags again? Is it that time of year? Do I need to sort of, you know, batten down the hatches and try and survive the monsoon? So if that is you, you really do have my sympathy today. Someone else who doesn't have my sympathy, however, is the BBC. They don't have my sympathy much. Sir Keir Starmer, no, he doesn't have my sympathy much either. And people who sit there on benefits, who aren't doing anything but enjoying life under a slanket. You know, when I was commuting in this morning on an overground and the underground, my mate, I stayed at someone's house, and they said, oh, because I said, I'm going to use that commute to sit and read through all the news stories. And he said, you might not be able to do that. You might be a bit pressed for space. It was like the apocalypse at the railway station. No one was there. no one was on the tube, then I remembered, oh yeah, it's Friday, the day that other people don't bother working because they sit at home, fart around watching the Real Housewives of something or the other, pretend they're doing something by occasionally prodding their mouths and, quite frankly, living a life of luxury compared to those people whose alarms go off at an ungodly time of day. So no, I don't really have much sympathy for people whom, quite frankly, reality should come into contact with their lives. This whole, how do we save the economy? Oh, we must look into why so many young people say they're unable to go to work. No, you just say, do you know what? This game of you being able to claim benefits when you're physically healthy is over. Go out, get a job or suffer the consequences. Because I was delivering newspapers at the age of 14. I was pushing trolleys at the age of 16, working behind the tills at Safe. I haven't stopped working since then. I worked to buy my first car, to get my driving lessons, to help fund me through university. During the holidays from university, I've always worked. Because if I didn't, guess what? I'd have no cash money. That is the reality of the world. So why don't we just get back to that? Sorry about that, just wanted to have a little rant. And if that's you, feel a bit guilty, would you? But no, not you, because you're a hard-working person and you deserve to be sitting there listening to me rant. Because I'm sure you're a patriot, discerning, and have dedicated your life to helping better this nation. OK, let's speak now to Paul Embry, a trade unionist and writer. Brilliant man indeed. And let's start off talking about the BBC, because it's still one of the big news stories, because today was the 11th hour, by which point the BBC had to offer a comprehensive apology to Donald Trump. They had to make sure the panorama in question that had spliced together parts of a speech to make it look like he was inciting insurrection was removed from anywhere that it could be accessed. And they were supposed to be as well proffering some sort of financial compensation. Now, they've made a sort of mealy-mouthed apology for a mistake. I think we all know it wasn't a mistake. I mean, how can it be a mistake? You don't accidentally come across a bit of speech there, stick it together and go, I didn't realise I'd done that. Oh, I didn't realise I wasn't supposed to doctor quotes as a journalist. Come on, it's not a mistake. Utterly ridiculous. They haven't offered him any cash money. They're sort of walking a tightrope here of what they can get away with. Paul, I mean, it's not a good look. We've now found out BBC Newsnight also edited that Trump speech. Why can't the BBC just turn around and go, do you know what? We're really left-wing. Most people who work here hate Donald Trump. They just automatically assume the rest of the world should think the same or do think the same, and that's what we've got to sort out. They're not doing that, are they?
Morning, Alex. No, they're not doing that. It was a serious transgression. There's no two ways about that. I can imagine if talkTV had doctored the speech of Sir Keir Starmer or some left-wing politician, there would have been hell to pay and you guys wouldn't have heard the last of it. And I don't think that, and I say this as someone who believes in public service broadcasting, and I believe actually in the BBC, I don't see why the BBC should be subjected to any sort of lower threshold. The problem is, Alex, I mean, I know the BBC a little bit. I've walked around their studios. I've done media stuff for them. And the truth is that the BBC is staffed largely, particularly in London, by, if you like, young graduate progressives who tend to live in some of the more sort of fashionable districts and have those kind of very hyper-liberal worldviews. And they bring that worldview often to their work, sometimes actually without realising it. Sometimes they don't actually realise that they're showing that level of bias in the output. And the reason is because they believe that their own worldview is inherently the right one. If you like, that's the default position, and that anything that sits outside of that is a fringe position that occasionally has to be indulged because we've got to show that we're impartial. That's the way they kind of approach it, and I think that's why they get into these sorts of scrapes. And I remember actually Andrew Marr, who obviously was the political editor of the BBC for some time, he wrote a piece some years ago where he said, look, there's no denying it. The BBC is infested with cultural liberals. It is a culturally liberal organisation. And if Andrew Marr, someone on the left himself, a liberal lefty himself, is saying that, you have to take it seriously.
I mean, I said this in the first hour, and I'm going to repeat it again now, because I don't think it's being said enough. And because I did work at the BBC, I was at ITV, I loved ITV when I worked there. I really did. I mean, hands up, I adored working at ITV. Brilliant newsrooms. I worked in ITV Wales, ITV Tyne Tees, and every second of that I enjoyed. It just so happened that they were all merging their newsrooms, and the BBC were fishing for talent and said to me, why don't you come and join us? We've got a VIP traineeship scheme. We're going to take 10 of you from across journalism, and we're going to sort of nurture you and train you up to be the next big thing in broadcasting. Brilliant. I thought, this is a golden opportunity. I go to the BBC, and what I find there absolutely horrified me. And I'll tell you why. I was miserable. I was depressed because, frankly, if you are not part of the Guardian worshipping culture of the BBC, you're made to feel like something on the bottom of somebody's shoe. And that is how you feel if you work there. That is how you feel if you turn up as a guest there. I remember, you know, I went on Newsnight, you've probably seen the clip, talking about Brexit, was sat alongside Alistair Campbell. The man behaved repugnantly. He was belittling, he was bullying, he was rude. And actually, as the cameras panned away, he was actually becoming physically aggressive. Physically aggressive. Now, after that particular interview, the whole of the Newsnight team gathered around me. Are you okay? Arms around me. That's terrible. He shouldn't have done that. We're shocked, we're horrified. You know, do you want a cup of tea? You're all clucking and cooing around me, deeply apologetic. And yet that guy appears on the BBC every 5 seconds, right? They still get him on all the time. Now, if I had done something like that and was abhorrently rude to somebody, flailing my arms around, almost whacking them in the face, I would never be invited back on. And this is, to me, the main problem with the BBC. Anybody who, you say it's all staffed by these lefty liberals, by and large, I don't think it necessarily, there's a lot of them, there's a majority of them. But the problem is people who don't agree with that are intimidated. They're terrified. They know if they were to even voice a single suggestion that actually, you know, maybe Hamas aren't a great organisation. Do you know what? Brexit hasn't been done properly. Do you know what? Most of the country really like Nigel Farage and reform, so perhaps when we platform them, we should make it more even-handed. You know, if anyone were to suggest that at the BBC, the first thing that happens is all the leftists jump up and down going, they need to be sacked, just as Sir Ed Davey has done about Sir Robbie Gibb, who sits on the BBC board and is now, for some reason, being thrown under the bus. Why? Because he's right-wing. The problem here is that the BBC despises the right wing. They need to sort this out, Paul. It is a bullying culture there.
Well, I think I did see your encounter with Alistair Campbell. I think a lot of people have seen it. And that kind of speaks to what I was just saying, that actually there's a kind of default position on the BBC on certain issues, which is very much a sort of left liberal worldview. And if anyone dissents from that, then it's looked upon as some fringe position, and quite often as some sort of crackpot position. And it's not just, I mean, the whole Brexit issue, I think, has been a very stark illustration of that phenomenon. But you can also talk about trans issues, for example. I mean, the BBC, and I think it's pretty much admitted this recently, that its bias in terms of the trans issue has been overwhelming, and you know, it constantly runs articles on its website where it talks about a man who identifies as a woman committing a crime, in some cases a sexual offence, and referring to that person as a woman. Now, that is a contentious, highly disputed way of operating, but the BBC just does it as a default. And I think you can also talk about things like immigration, for example, as well, where it's got the default position that mass immigration is a good thing, and anybody who dissents from that is really holding a fringe view. But I'll just go on to say this, Alex, it's not just the case with BBC News. I think if you look at things like BBC drama output, if you look at entertainment, more and more, you know, Doctor Who, for example, more and more it's becoming highly, if you like, wokeified and continuing to present a worldview, which is just actually, you know, a fantasy for the rest of us. I mean, most dramas today from the BBC, modern day dramas, and in fact, even period dramas, are depicted as if they took place in Islington and portray a Britain that for many of us doesn't actually exist. And I think, and I say again, I stress I'm a BBC person. I believe in the BBC, but it is losing the faith of millions of people across this country, and it's only got itself to blame for that.
When I think about series, whether it's Strictly Come Dancing or MasterChef or, you know, celebrities or whatever, and you think of when's the last time you saw somebody who was overtly right-wing on those? They're put on as an object of fun, if they are. I remember, who's that Thomas guy? It was Thomas Skinner, that's right. It was put on Strictly Come Dancing, and, you know, he's the sort of the token right-winger. He's not even that right-wing. He's just a guy with a Twitter account who says bosh. It's not like he's being a politician or anything. And yet he was hounded. He was absolutely monstered for even existing, for the BBC to have the audacity of putting someone on one of their programmes who's not the forelock-tugging liberal lefty. And this is half of the problem. Like I said, it's not just the news. It's throughout the culture of the BBC. They all programme the same way. They all think the same way. Those people who don't dare not speak a word. Let's move on from the BBC, because we could bang on about it all day and bash it, but I don't know I do know what some of the solutions are, but I rattled on about those in the first hour. Let's move on to if there are any solutions to what seems like a massive loss of control in number 10. Now, this is typical of politics. Let's not pretend this is a problem that's unique to the Labour Party. We saw a chaotic number 10 under Boris Johnson especially, who seemed not to be able to control his staff and presided over what was accused of being a toxic culture. Well, if you look at the roll call of people who have now departed number 10 under Sir Keir Starmer, it's quite astonishing. I've not really heard of many of these people that, you know, you wouldn't necessarily write home about them. Rav Atwal, a former Treasury official, Tom Webb's gone, Matthew Doyle, Steph Driver, James Lyons, Sue Gray, Paul Ovenden. Now, I don't really know who any of these people are, but the staff turnover seems to be fairly impressive, which suggests to me that this is a Prime Minister not in control. What do you reckon's going on?
Well, it certainly does give that impression, and I think that when that impression is given by any government and by any Prime Minister, then it has the potential to do huge damage to the reputation of that government. And look, I mean, I know a little bit about Morgan McSweeney, and the truth is, and this is in many respects the tragedy of it, Morgan McSweeney is actually one of the few people around number 10 who I think actually understands what the Labour Party needs to do to reconnect with millions of working class people, you know, previous supporters who it's lost over recent years. Morgan's very close to the blue Labour tendency. He's somebody who understands the issues of, for example, massive deindustrialisation in some of our post-industrial areas, somebody who understands the issue of rapid demographic change in working class communities, and has actually been organising within the Labour Party to try to reconnect it with some of its traditional heartlands. So you know, I'm not someone who's going to come on here and start bashing Morgan McSweeney, because I think he's done a lot of good. The problem is, I think there's a lot of people in the upper echelons of the Labour Party still, including politicians on the front bench, who are still instinctively hostile to those sorts of politics. Now, I don't know if he's been briefing. I know that sort of thing happens, and I know it's corrosive, because I think people out there in the country look at that sort of soap opera when it occurs, as it did under the Tories lots of times, and they say, look, hold on a second, the country is in a mess. The economy's busted. We've got massive problems in terms of social disintegration in our country. We've got NHS waiting lists through the roof. We've got a housing crisis. We've got all the problems in terms of, you know, the cost of living crisis hasn't quite gone away. And all we're seeing at number 10 are people fighting like ferrets in a sack over career ambitions and internal power struggle. And that switches people off from politics. So unless the Labour Party, Labour government can change the narrative on that quickly and get back to bread and butter issues, then I think it's going to be hit very seriously electorally in the long term.
I think you're right, Paul. I think you're right. And it's a political problem as old as time. Paul Embry, thank you ever so much. It's always a delight hearing the common sense of the brilliant Paul. OK, we're going to take a short break now. But in an astonishing turn of events in Germany, who have been very, let's say, militarily shy for evidence reasons over the course of the past century, the coalition government there has now agreed to a new military service plan to boost troop numbers. Well, if Deutschland is doing it, should we? We're discussing that with Mark Francois, who's Shadow Defence Minister, after this.
Big news coming this December. Our talkTV app is moving to the Talk app. You can watch, catch up and listen to all your favourite shows and podcasts anytime, anywhere, all on the Talk app. From Monday, 1st of December, the talkTV app will no longer exist, so don't miss out. So head over to your App Store or Google Play and search Talk now.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello and welcome back. Now, it's quite extraordinary when Germany decide they need to have military service, because this is a country that has been extremely coy about arming themselves, about having a big old bloated standing army. I mean, for obvious reasons, right? Germany is the last country you'd expect to say, right, we need a bit of a military service to expand our troop numbers because we might have to start getting involved in stuff. Let's speak to Mark Francois now, who is the Conservative MP and Shadow Defence Minister, on what's going on in Germany and whether we need to be looking to potentially follow suit. Mark, I've just come back fairly recently from Israel, where everybody has to do military service, and I think it's a blimmin' good thing. I think it actually encourages loyalty to one's nation, it instills discipline, hierarchy, it gives people invaluable life skills, and frankly, when you look at the dwindling size of our own armed forces, which are pretty much halved since the Falklands conflict, I kind of think, hey-oh, if Berlin can decide this is a good idea, perhaps we can too. What do you reckon?
Thank you. Well, in the case of Germany, the Ukraine war has been a wake-up call for all of NATO. But, you know, it's simple geography. Germany is nearer to the problem than we are in the United Kingdom. And there's a new government in Germany under Chancellor Merz, who are taking the whole Russian threat far more seriously than the previous centre-left government in Germany did. And that is why they are contemplating these measures, because Vladimir Putin won't have a ceasefire. He continues to try and advance in Ukraine. He continues to use cruise missiles to attack children's hospitals in Ukraine, and Germany is reacting to that.
But
now, in terms of what we do,
yeah,
traditionally we have had for many years volunteer armed forces, but there's already a problem, and there's about to be a bigger one. The problem is that we've got more people leaving the armed forces now than are joining, and Labour have a bill going through the House of Commons next Tuesday called the Northern Ireland Troubles Bill. What that will do is it will reopen this whole conveyor belt of historical investigations into our brave veterans who fought in Northern Ireland. If it hadn't have been for the army holding the line in Northern Ireland and fighting the IRA and loyalist terrorists too, there'd never have been a Good Friday Agreement. But Labour, for ideological reasons, because they're human rights fanatics, want to pass this bill in the Commons on Tuesday. That would mean these veterans could be hounded 50 years on.
Yeah.
If they do that, fewer people will join the army and more people will leave. There are already people leaving the Special Forces, leaving the SAS now for fear of being dragged into court over historical allegations. And that's why 9 senior generals wrote a letter to the Times in the week. This is virtually unprecedented, protesting about what Labour planned to do, making very clear the effect that would have on the armed forces. And in their words, not mine, Labour's proposals would represent, I quote, a direct threat to national security. Those are very powerful words. That's why from around noon onwards in Tuesday, there's going to be a big protest in Parliament Square from veterans coming from all over the country to protest at what the government are proposing to do to them. They defended this country. We should be defending them, not trying to get them prosecuted at the hands of Sinn Féin.
I couldn't agree more. I find it utterly repugnant that we are now looking at potentially persecuting and prosecuting individuals for acts carried out in the theatre of a conflict. I mean, if we can't have armed forces who are able to actually do what they're supposed to do in defence of the realm, then we cannot defend the realm at all. But let's talk as well about, we know that we're in a bad situation when if we had to step up and defend this nation, I really don't think that we can. When you look at how reduced our troop numbers are in the United Kingdom, how actually all this DEI nonsense has been brought into the army, to the RAF, saying, oh, wow, we got too many white pilots, things like that. Now you're talking about, you know, attacking people for things they might have done when they were serving as a member of the armed forces. You know, I watched the everything Remembrance Day. I watched Remembrance Sunday. I also watched the concert the night before, tears in my eyes, thinking, where have we gone so wrong in this country? Do you think, because we haven't really covered this in our conversation so far, but do you think some idea of conscription could be beneficial?
Well, our tradition has been, by the way, I had the privilege of being at the Royal British Legion Festival of Remembrance that night.
Oh, it's beautiful, wasn't it?
And it was incredibly moving.
Yeah.
I mean, the Legion do it very, very well. Incredibly moving. And I thought, you know, it's in the presence of His Majesty the King. It's a very fitting tribute, and they particularly concentrated on World War II because of the 80th anniversary of VE Day and the J Day. But, you know, if you were at that thing and you weren't moved, then you were made of stone. Yeah. But to come back to your point, this is why what the government are proposing is so dangerous. You have to remember that there were 300,000 British soldiers who served in Northern Ireland on Operation Banner. They were piggy in the middle. They had the IRA on one side and they had the UVF and the UDA on the other, so-called loyalist terrorists. They were there to try and hold the line. Now, 50 years on, Sinn Féin and their old mates in the IRA are trying to drag these men back into court. Why? Because they want to change history. They want to try and change the whole narrative about that conflict. And they want people to believe that somehow the army was an army of occupation and the IRA were freedom fighters. And that makes the veterans absolutely furious. I mean, who in their right mind will want to serve under a government that puts the IRA above army veterans? But that's what this bill does.
Oh, no, I totally agree. You still haven't answered my question, Mark, about whether we could potentially look at having something like military service or conscription. Very briefly.
Forgive me. I'll come straight to that.
Yeah.
Our tradition has been that we have conscription in wartime. You know, we are not at war. You could argue there's a sort of grey zone with Russian cyber attacks and such like. So we are in a struggle with Russia, that is true, but we are not involved in a full-scale war. If it were to come to that, I am sure that we would introduce conscription. But short of that, it's obviously important to have the strongest armed forces that we can. And you don't want to do anything to undermine morale, to make more people leave and fewer people join. And what the government are proposing to do next Tuesday will be an aid to our enemies. And this, again, is something the generals said. They said, you know, our enemies will be watching this very closely. There will be people in Russia and in China and elsewhere who will literally be watching that debate next Tuesday and saying to themselves, I can't believe a British government would be stupid enough to do this. But at the moment, that's what they propose to do. That's why next Tuesday, from noon, veterans will be turning up in Parliament Square from all over the country. And if members of the public agree with them, they'll be welcome to come along as well and share in the protest.
Mark, thank you ever so much. Great to have you on the show today. was just thinking then, and my little brain was ruminating, because I do think that you've got so many kids, you know, cycling around in ballies with knives. If they really want to mess about with weapons, maybe they should put on some camo and get trained to do it properly. Joking aside, though, I mean, should we have some sort of military service in the United Kingdom? I don't know whether it would be appropriate to make sure everybody does military service, but perhaps there could be something where instead of going on gap year, kids could be offered the chance of, if you want to go and sort of train in the military for a year and become a reservist, then you do that and we're going to offset that against your future student loan or something like that. Incentivise young people going and being members of the armed forces so they're trained up, they're capable, they're ready to be called upon. Because I tell you what, when you actually are part of the camaraderie, putting on a uniform with your national flag on it, and you're being told you're learning these skills to defend your realm, it goes a long way towards a sense of national pride and discipline as well. Right, OK, we're going to take a short break now. Talking about discipline and pride. Oh, the BMA, it's like some sort of gangster union yet again. Junior doctors are going to go on strike, not all of them, some of them, because the pay rise they've had already, which is already pretty decent, it's sort of 27% or some such, isn't enough. No, when no one else is having any pay rise and we're struggling to pay our bills, etc. The junior doctors are demanding more and more and more. But apparently most people in the BMA didn't even vote for this. We're going to be discussing that with an NHS GP just after this.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Oh, the NHS. I mean, it's struggling so much. It's struggling so much. It's breaking my heart. My poor mum, she's got a really bad knee. She's hobbling around like, you know, a really old age pensioner, and she's always been very sprightly. And it's so frustrating because they keep phoning her up, cancelling this appointment because of sickness. Oh, you got to go for an X-ray, but you're going to have to wait a month. Oh, you got to wait 3 weeks for your results, and nothing. Nothing. The woman's in agony. And it's making me so angry because she actually worked for the NHS for decades. And you just think we've got to get a grip in this country. It's not okay to have a health service on its knees. Doctors know this. They know how long waiting lists are. They moan about resources. They moan about not having enough time to see patients. So why, for crying out loud, are junior doctors, not all of them, but some of them, going on strike yet again, when they've already had a pay rise equivalent to 28.9% over the past 2 years? Oh, wouldn't it be great to shower them in pound coins and £50? Yeah, great. We can't afford to. We know how bad the economy is unless you're living under a rock. Turns out the BMA, however, when it came to polling people on whether or not they wanted to go on this strike, 48% said no, 19% were unsure, so only a third of them backed it. And it's just going to hit the NHS really where it hurts again. And I don't blame Wes Streeting for accusing the BMA of trying to hold the country to ransom and calling it morally reprehensible. Let's speak now to Dr. Basha Mukherjee, who is an NHS GP. Dr. Basha, I mean, where are you on this? Do you think, well, fair enough, you know, for a long time we have not paid doctors a wage that represents their skills and how important they are to society? Or do you think, come on, this is not the time to be doing this?
So it's an interesting question about where I am on this, because I think nobody feels that these strikes are a good thing. Not even the doctors. I know it seems that it's a really fun option to go on strike, but it's not. I have to say that this is such a drain on resident doctors' morale that we are here for the 13th time in almost 3 years now. And it just feels like it's a revolving door where the government is not listening to us. And it's absolutely key that we understand that the NHS feels like a punishment to work at. It feels like a punishment to have chosen to be a doctor and to work in this country and to want to serve people. Because not only are you not being able to deliver good quality of care, you're having to pull through and hold it together when the whole system is broken. Effectively, one doctor would be doing the work of 2-3 doctors. And if you just imagine what that feels like in terms of constantly running on steam, essentially, not being able to deliver the care, and you know, at the end of it all, you still have the same outcomes in terms of poor outcomes for patients. So it's not a nice place to work at, and we're just trying to scream at the government to say, you need to do something about this. This can't keep going. This is all this is about.
But I mean, the doing something is not necessarily giving people who've already had a 28% pay rise over the past 2 years even more money. I mean,
what does that actually look like, though? That looks like going from £18 an hour to £23 an hour. It sounds like a huge amount when you're talking about in percentages, but if you actually talk about the hourly rate, it isn't such a huge ask at all, especially where this government,
if you add it all up, but you know, if you add it all up, the millions and millions and millions of pounds that it will cost to do that, if it doesn't really make much material difference to the doctors, that money could be better invested elsewhere, surely. And the thing is, you know, look, I have sympathy. I would love doctors and nurses in this country to be adequately resourced, to be recompensed in line with the skills and the effort and their necessity to public life. But when you train to be a doctor, you know what the pay brackets are, okay? It's publicly available information. You know what you are going to be paid, and you make the choice to go into that profession. And I understand that when you're in it, all of a sudden you come into contact with reality.
So are you suggesting to all those young people who want to do well in society, who want to give back to society, who want to help people, that they completely absolve all their aspirations to do that because they know what a trap the NHS is to be working in? And therefore they shouldn't even bother going into medicine at all, which is actually what is happening. And for those of the ones that are going into medical school and getting out of medical school, they feel so hopeless that they have to leave the country. They have to uproot and leave the country because they don't even have job security.
But I've also read that there are plenty of people who've gone through medical school and applying for positions within the NHS, and there's so much competition, they are essentially jobless and they can't seem to find employment. We also know they put a cap on the amount of training that people who can go into training at medical school, which beggars belief, quite frankly. But look, I did just say I have sympathy. I would like doctors and nurses to feel like they're getting the recompense that they deserve, but we know that we can't afford this. You'd have to be living under a rock to think that it's sort of, milk and honey right now in the economy. We know that there are massive waiting lists and backlogs, partly because of COVID. And in what world is demanding more pay at this moment in time going to help? And look, let's be honest, right? I know that junior doctors or residential doctors, whatever they're called right now, don't get paid riches and they do long hours and it's probably very tough. But by and large, as a doctor, as you progress through your career, you have good take-home pay.
They're getting stuck. They're getting stuck in training at the very base level of pay because there aren't enough training positions. We, as doctors, are getting replaced, and this has been a strategic movement by this government and the government before us to replace us. And
with
this has been happening for years now by IMGs, so doctors that we import from other countries that we can afford to pay less, so they can drive down the pay for doctors in this country, trained in this country, by doctors not even doctors sometimes, PAs, pharmacists, nurses. I'm not saying that they don't have a role, but the roles are being merged and it's becoming very grey as to what a doctor does versus what a nurse and a pharmacist can just do a simple little course to just get the qualification to be able to prescribe, to diagnose. Whereas the amount of aptitude it takes to get into medical school, the skill level it involves to get through medical school, to go through the whole training program, that is completely being disregarded here. So doctors are feeling disillusioned. They don't have a position in society anymore. They're getting stuck at training level because they can't progress. So of course, it's, can you imagine being stuck at the same pay, even if you're trying to increase your skill level, etc., and nothing's happening, and the government's just not listening to you?
But you know what? What you're saying, I have a great amount of sympathy with, actually, because I think most people in most walks of life, if you were saying, do you know what it feels like to be stuck at the same rate of pay, however hard you try, however much you're breaking your back to go to work? I think there are people in all walks of life, from bin collectors to journalists, who all sympathise with that, because the economy is going to hell in a handcart.
Let's be very honest here. With the level of aptitude, and I'm going to be very blatant here, with the level of aptitude or skill set that a UK-trained doctor has, they can take that anywhere in the world and serve humanity anywhere else in the world, because humans are the same. UK population are not special in any way, and if the government continues to treat us in the way that we have no option but to leave the country or go to private.
But then it's fine then, isn't it? Because what you're saying is, if that's the case, that's great, we can just import cheaper doctors and nurses from elsewhere. So which one is it?
And it still costs the NHS and it still costs the taxpayer to be working in the system where we lose our trained doctors and bring in new doctors from other countries who can't assimilate in the same way, who do not understand the same nuances of the cultural nuances that we have.
So what is the solution?
Who would they rather get seen by in terms of the camaraderie, the rapport building, etc., of UK trained doctors versus bringing doctors from elsewhere? It costs the NHS money every time we lose doctors to other countries.
I totally agree, and I think most people listening to this would wholeheartedly agree that I would love, when I go to see my doctor, to be seen by a British trained doctor, because you know those cultural nuances, the sort of particularities of language, you know that stuff's baked in, which when it comes to face-to-face treatment and care. And I have said to you, I would love to see doctors and nurses especially, can I just say, recompensed to a level that is in line with the skills and the amount of training they have to go through. I've said that, but what do you do when the money's just not there? When the economy is on its knees, as we know it is.
It's a case of redirection. And as I said, it's not just about the money. What about the training positions? Why are we being replaced? Why has the government got enough money?
Because we can't afford you, apparently. You just said so yourself.
Doctors.
You're being replaced because the UK economy can't afford to pay British doctors as much as they would like, and it's cheaper to bring in doctors from abroad. So that answers that question.
What makes me really sad is that patients at the moment want to see a doctor, but get given a pharmacist appointment.
I know.
Get seen by a nurse. They don't get what they need because they can't. They've not been trained in the same way as a doctor to get a doctor's service, right? So we have to rebook them. This adds up in terms of the cost. This is where the cost inefficiencies are. And the government really thinks that by just replacing us by cheaper staff, that's going to solve the problem. This is where the wastage of the money is happening.
One thing I hear a lot from people is the idea that the people running the health service don't actually know what it's like to work for the health service, that they are bureaucrats, that they're not trained doctors and nurses, they've not been on the shop floor, let's say, and we'd be far better with an NHS staffed and managed by people who know the reality of the situation, of which you were one. So let's try and see if we can draw out a solution here. Let's say the pot of money cannot increase because the economy is really not in a good state. We all know that. You'd have to be living under a rock to think otherwise. So let's just say the budget stays as it is. Well, what is the solution then?
The solution is redirecting the funds. And that will involve cost cutting in other areas of the NHS. And absolutely, as a clinical staff member, I would always think that the priority should be clinical staff. They should be prioritized because they're delivering the service.
So what are we cutting?
There are many layers of inefficiencies when it comes to management that needs to be looked at very stringently. And unfortunately, that might result in job losses in other areas. But we have to think about, and this happened last year with the NHS England being axed as well. But we have to think about where the money is being spent and where would it be best utilized. And part of this is also about giving resident doctors in this country hope as well. And that means increasing training positions and not blurring the roles of resident doctors and these R staff, as we call them, or pharmacists, PAs, nurses, etc.
But I just want to know
in society. Stop chastising us all over media. Stop creating this media narrative. You know, using words like ransom, calling us things like all the negative terminology. This has resulted in resident doctors and NHS staff getting so much more violence from patients as well.
I'm not sure. Listen, I think that was Wes Streeting's words. Let's clarify that. And he's calling the BMA, the union, that. If anything is true, one thing I've noticed is there's a sort of mantra the minute you want to talk about the NHS. It's sort of an understood form of words that you use, where you always have to say our hard-working doctors and nurses. We stood on our doorsteps banging saucepans for the best part of a year. I think that by and large, when people talk about the NHS, the recognition that the frontline medical staff are vital and do an important role is always acknowledged. But we seem to go round in circles with successive governments. We just end up in a deeper and deeper black hole. Probably, I would suggest that our NHS is entirely state-run, so it is intrinsically tied to the economy. I used to live in Belgium, where the population density of Brussels is akin to London, okay? And it's a hugely diverse city as well. And yet, their medical service works really well because it operates as a sort of hybrid between state-provided medicine and the private sector. Is it time now that we suddenly go, do you know what, governments aren't very good at running the health service? Perhaps we need a massive overhaul and a rethink right at the very bones of the NHS.
I would agree. There's lots to be learned from private services. First of all, is its efficiencies, because it's all about money, and because they're smaller companies. And this is one of the reasons why GP services, as much as patients feel like they do not get what they're looking for from GPs, are run very efficiently. They don't use extra resources than they absolutely need to, because everything is tied to profit making. The unfortunate problem with the NHS, and this is my experience as a patient as well, so many layers. You know, if you're a patient, you try to find one thing out from your hospital. You have to call one person, then you have to call another person, have to call another person. Yeah. Nobody actually feels like they're doing their job. Yeah. And I feel there are lots of people employed within the NHS that are absolutely terrible at their job. They shouldn't have that job. Do you know, if you can't pick up a phone as a secretary and answer a question that a patient is asking you, you shouldn't have that job.
I'm really minded to
Get rid
agree
of
with you.
people that are bad at their job and create competition and create an opportunity. At the moment, any doctor can get the job. We should be focusing on quality. The best quality doctors should be staying in the UK, not leaving the UK and going to other countries, which is the opposite of what's happening, actually. The people who are, unfortunately, who are desperate, they have no other option but to stay in the UK, are staying in the UK in the NHS. Everybody else who's got the skill set is leaving because they have better options. So we should create competition.
Dr. Bash, it's been wonderful talking to you. And can I just say thank you? Because I do think that the vast majority of doctors and GPs are really under duress and largely do their best to do what is an extremely difficult job. Although I do think, you know, what we've got in the NHS is basically the state with a few doctors attached to it. And the government aren't pretty good at running a lot of things, are they? So why on earth they should be running the health service, I don't know. You just have to look at countries where it does work, who are also in economic turmoil. France, you know, most of Europe is. And yet their health services just really aren't on their knees as much as ours. We've got to stop treating the NHS like this sacred cow that must be state-led. It's over-politicised, and you know what happens when anything's politicised. It's only a matter of time before it goes to the dogs. Right, if you want to talk about anything that we've been talking about today, we've spoken about the BBC, we've spoken about the armed forces, we've spoken about turmoil in the Labour Party, we sort of touched upon the forthcoming budget and how doom-laden that might be, and of course the NHS, or anything else that we've covered. Please do get in touch. 03444991000 is the number. It's your normal network rate. You can use that number to send me a WhatsApp or leave me a voice note on WhatsApp. 87222 is the number if you'd like to send me a text message. Right talk before your text. Going to take a little break now, but don't go anywhere because I'm back right after.
In terms of your question around taxes, there are no additional tax rises needed beyond the ones that I've set out.
Don't need to increase taxes. I'm not coming back with more borrowing or more taxes.
I will not increase your national insurance. I will not increase your VAT, and I will not increase your income tax.
We don't need to come back for more. We've done that now. We've wiped the slate clean.
The economic circumstances have declined, deteriorated since a year ago. We are having to look at taxes and spending.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello and welcome back to the show. Let's do a voice note now, shall we? This is Karen.
Hi, Alex. I do agree with Dr. Basher in some senses that they are being replaced by doctors from abroad. That's what she's trying to say, because they get paid a lot less and they have less qualifications, which is a bit of a worry for the patient in this country. Our doctors were highly trained. But what's interesting is now it's affecting them. They're the ones shouting the loudest. This has been affecting every sector in the country. She's right. They are being replaced by less qualified doctors and they are merging roles in grey areas. I know that because I work in the NHS.
Yeah, it's interesting. Karen there pointing out that this is not unique to the NHS. The idea that employing people from abroad and replacing your own workforce has become quite commonplace in the United Kingdom. Let's take some calls and speak to Kevin, who is in Portsmouth. Good morning, Kevin.
Good morning, Alex. Just as a quick aside, you mentioned the French health service is really good. Don't ever get yourself hurt and get in a French frontline ambulance, because they got nothing in them. I can talk to you at length about this, but I'm serious, because I've actually done a little bit of a study on it through Twinning. That and the fact I speak French, and I got good contacts over there. But no, back to doctors. I'm a driving instructor, and I had a newly minted doctor who was training to drive. Happy to say she passed her test jolly well. And in 3 years, she's off to Australia. It's all organised. It's all fixed up.
Yeah.
All agreed. Now, I said to her, OK, let's just suppose instead that all your tuition fees, all your book shifts, skeleton, lab time, exams, the lot, were all paid for by the state. OK? So the only cost you had to cover was board, lodging and drinking. Trainee doctors are bonny drinkers, let me tell you. I've known a few in my time. But you got to work for the NHS for 10 years. Okay, 10 years to the day. If you're a day short, you repay the whole lot at full market value. And she said, yeah, that seems reasonable. I said, further to that, after 5 years, just working in the NHS, if you want to go out and start developing a private practice, you can do it. You're still going to be working for a set amount of time for the NHS every week. And she said, yeah, that sounds fine. She's going to be a accident and emergency doctor, so the private sector thing wouldn't apply to her. But she said, yeah, as a model, that would make sense. Now, a third of her cohort at her university, last time I spoke to her, which was in the summer, still haven't found work. So we're training these people, but then we're not employing them. The cost of training a doctor is a hell of a lot less than their 9.5, whatever it is, grand a year tuition fees. It's going to be a lot more than that. So that money's now being wasted. What are they going to do?
You make very good points, Kevin. I agree with pretty much all of them. There you go. Let's put Kevin in Portsmouth as the new health secretary. Let's quickly speak to Mandy, who's in Felixstowe. Hello, Mandy.
Good morning, Alex. I've just come out of hospital after 2 weeks.
Yeah.
At the beginning, I spent 4 days in A&E.
4 days in A&E?
Yes. Taken food, being put on a reclining chair.
4 days on a reclining chair?
Yes.
Oh, Mandy. Listen, I really want to get what your story is, but I'm very keenly aware that we're going to have to go to advert break extremely soon, and I don't think we're going to do it justice. So stay on the line and let's see if we can catch up about this. But don't go anywhere, Mandy. You don't go anywhere either. I'm back after this.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello and welcome back, and don't you worry, we are going to get our caller just for the break back on at 12:20. I had to make a bit of an editorial decision there that I thought she was going to tell us a story that we really ought to hear. She was talking about 4 days in A&E on a reclining chair, but we had to go to an advert break, and I thought, well, it's not going to do that story any justice if I just go, oh yeah, thank you, bye. So I've made an editorial decision to come back and have a more in-depth conversation about that in a short while. Talking about editorial decisions. You can see the segue I did there. It turns out that Newsnight also stand accused of editing a Donald Trump speech and also ignoring concerns that were raised about it. This aired in an episode in 2022, and again it appeared that Mr. Trump was encouraging his supporters to riot. Let's have a look.
We're going to cheer on our brave senators and congressmen and women, and we fight. We fight like hell. We're going to cheer on our brave senators and congressmen and women, and we're probably not going to be cheering so much for some of them.
I mean, what is this about editing that speech? I can't leave it alone. I mean, look, on some level, I have a degree of sympathy, OK? I've sat in that position, I've done that job, and if there's one thing about Donald Trump is he is quite a circuitous in the way he talks. You can listen to him almost sort of rapt for about 1 hour as he strings it out and he moves around in his speech. So, you know, managing to get it down to a pithy little sound bite to put in a time-restricted edit, well, I understand. But the first rule of being a journalist is you don't invent the news. You can't curate clips and stick them together to make it seem like something else entirely was being said. Guess who's going to join us now? That's right, it's that old curmudgeon, my old work husband, chief misanthropist, Mr. Kevin O'Sullivan. Hello, Kev.
Hi, Alex. How are you?
Yeah, I'm all right. I'm safely in the Talk Towers, which is a haven of peace and tranquility compared to what it can be like sometimes sitting in other studios. And good old Ted, I was mentioning earlier about a particular Newsnight experience I had. Now, by the way, I actually really do enjoy going on Newsnight. But it hasn't always been fun and games being on that panel. I just want to remind you as of a particular incident that Ted's dug out of the archives from somewhere and has got teed up for us.
Will any of these people who fought so hard for Brexit ever face up to their own responsibility and face the fact that what they all promised was a pack of lies, what they all promised was never going to work? None of you have ever brought forward a plan that says this is Brexit and this is how it works without damaging us here in the UK. So all your lies about taking back control, more money for the NHS, sovereignty, immigration, the rest of it, you've failed on every
I knew you
thing.
were going to come up with, you know, the money for the NHS. Nothing to do with me, not my campaign. And it's very rich, a man who essentially was part of telling lies to invade a country, to accuse me of dishonesty.
I think you might have lost the argument there, my dear. If I may patronise you even more. Honestly.
No, that's it now.
Yes, I will.
No,
I'm
that's
sorry.
it. No, that's it.
No,
That's
sorry.
it.
You bring these people on, you never challenge them. You let them talk utter rubbish about Brexit. And it's happened on the BBC for year after year after year.
These people, I tell you what, my look of shock there. No, but what was quite, what you don't see, OK, as that sort of plays out, is the campaign, they quickly go to the end because they can see Mr. Campbell's getting rather hot under the collar. So that, you know, the titles are rolling, it's come to the end of the programme, the camera's panning away from him. And at this moment in time, Kev, he's trying to snatch off his microphone. He's leaning across me, he's flinging his fists, like it's centimetres away from my face. Everybody in the studio, there's a sort of stunned silence because they actually think he's about to deck me one. And my argument is on this, you know, afterwards, after, you know, he had gone, stormed out of the studios, everyone said, are you okay? That was terrible. It's always, he's done things like this before, always a bit of a bully. And I'm like, well, stop inviting him on the programme then, right?
Yeah, exactly. Look, you know, I used to know Alistair quite well, and actually, usually in person, He's a very nice guy, but you see things like that, and I just think he needs psychiatric help. He really, really does. He is so imbued with his own certitude that he is unable to debate. And if someone like yourself puts forward an alternative viewpoint, it just enrages him. He's unable to tolerate it. It's a ridiculous thing to see, and fun to see that Newsnight's now in the same kind of trouble as Panorama. It too doctored Donald Trump's January the 6th, 2021 speech. So they've done it twice. Now, I was on air last night when the news broke of the BBC apology. Well, I use the term apology loosely. The BBC's apology to Donald Trump. Now, that is that alleged apology is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. The BBC has just dug its own grave. Yeah. The newspapers, journalists have this tendency. I've been guilty of it myself many times. Every time there's an apology, they always put the adjective before it, groveling. There's a groveling apology. There's a groveling apology. All apologies in journalism are groveling. Now, the real trouble with that apology last night, or today's apology to Donald Trump by the BBC, it is nothing like groveling. It is not groveling, and it needed to be groveling. What they're saying, they're sticking to this absurd line, oh, it was an error in judgment. It wasn't an error in judgment. It was a deliberate manipulation of the truth. They deliberately twisted the truth to tell a lie about the President of the United States of America. And they did not concede that. They said, oh, well, it's a bit of a mistake, honest mistake, and we're really sorry about that. And then finishing off this statement, this apology, this ungroveling apology, with the absurd, ludicrous Alice in Wonderland contention that this did not constitute defamation. It is one of the worst defamations I've ever heard. You cannot say about a president of the United States. What he did was he got the mob. He told the mob, go up to Capitol Hill, storm it, commit violent insurrection. Come on, everybody, let's have a revolution. He didn't do that, but that's what they made it look. He said that is defamation on an epic scale.
The thing that shocks me the most, right, about, because we're talking about the integrity of the BBC, we're talking about sticking to facts.
What integrity?
We're talking about honesty in the way they conduct their operations. And the thing that sticks in my craw the most about the grovelling apology is, however, it sort of says, well, it's not really our fault, but however, we accept that our edit, wait for it, unintentionally created the impression that we were showing a single continuous section. Unintentionally? What are you talking about? If you were going to do it, it's just... How is it unintentional? Oh, I'm sorry. The computer just accidentally spliced two bits of the speech together. We didn't realise it had happened. I mean, come on. If you're going to do something where there's a huge space of time in between two clips, you do a white frame, a sort of flash frame to show that these are separate times apart. Somebody has sat there and gone, let's stick that bit together and that bit together so it looks like this. These things don't happen unintentionally. It's pretty impossible for something like that to happen unintentionally unless some sort of, hyper-progressive AI has decided to take over the BBC's editing suite and take matters into their own hands. The idea that this sort of happened to slip together, these two random bits of footage just crept towards each other in a sleepwalk and no one noticed. It's a lie. It's not unintentional.
It's intentional, deliberate manipulation of the truth. And that's what the BBC needed to concede. They needed to get, sometimes in journalism, I've been doing this quite a long time, Alex, and sometimes in journalism, you have to get on your knees and beg. Often in journalism, you must be pragmatic. And the BBC is not being pragmatic here. It needed to be on its knees, begging for Trump's forgiveness. Trump will take one look at that today and he will go mental. He will now sue the BBC. I can guarantee you that. They have just dug their grave. I cannot believe, I said last night on air, the BBC corporately is sick in the head. It is so imbued with its own imagined wonderfulness, it cannot concede that it would ever do anything wrong. What it has done here is something terribly, terribly, terribly wrong, and it won't admit it, and it will get sued now from here to breakfast time. It is a disaster. I cannot believe how stupid those people at the BBC are. They are morons for this, absolute morons.
No, they are. I think it's a culture of arrogance. They think that, you know, they're auntie, they're His Majesty's BBC, we're the world leading, you know, journalistic organisation. And you're just saying it's about time you crawled out of your own backside and actually woke up to the fact that if it weren't for the licence fee, you wouldn't be in a good shape.
Exactly right. Lisa Nandy saying, and BBC is the light on the hill. Let me tell you, that light has been switched out. It is now a citadel of biased journalism, and it still suffers from a terrible case of Trump derangement syndrome. The reason they think that he hasn't been defamed is because they think that he is such a bad person that it's impossible to libel him. They're going to find out different.
Let's talk about a really sad story now. And this is the tragic story of Sarah Sharif, who's a schoolgirl who was tortured to death by her father after a catalogue of blunders by people who were scared of causing offence. Why? Because of her race, because of her religion. This poor wee thing who was forced to wear a hijab to cover up bruises. Neighbours heard blood-curdling screams but didn't report it because they're worried about being called racist. You know, people bang on and on about Islamophobia and, oh, you're racist. There are so many women out there in that religion who are forced to wear burqas, who have to undergo FGM, who are in forced marriages, cousin marriages, you know, who are shipped in as young brides from abroad. And we as a country have a duty of care to protect them. If they live here, they're our concern. And it is shocking yet again. I mean, it's not only always about the white victims of the rape gangs. There are plenty of little girls and women in that community who are really suffering because of the two-tier approach to holding people to account.
Exactly right. There's a sickness in Britain, in modern Britain. And the sickness, we saw that, we continue to see that with the rape gang scandal. Why did that proliferate? Why were 250,000 young, vulnerable white girls left to be abused and tortured and drugged by rape gangs? Because middle-class white people in authority, coppers, police chiefs, social workers, teachers, local politicians decided to prioritize their own fears of being labeled racist or Islamophobic because, of course, the perpetrators were mainly Muslim men of Pakistani origin. All of these people in authority were more worried about being labeled racist than they were worried about the fate of those poor girls. And when you come to Sarah Sharif, you got exactly the same thing. This dreadful report yesterday revealing that all of a sudden this poor little girl started turning up at school, started being seen wearing a hijab. Already massive suspicions because her father, her awful father, had a long history of domestic abuse against women and children. So quite what she was doing with him in the first place, God only knows. But the social workers had long suspicions that he could be beating poor little Sarah. She starts turning up in a hijab. They wanted to check for bruises, but they were too scared to lift the hijab up to take a look for fear of offending Islam. Once again, their fear, they prioritized their worry over being accused of being Islamophobic over the fate of that poor little girl. That is a scandal, and that is a sickness that goes right to the heart of what's wrong with modern Britain right now.
It's a sickness that I think we've seen play out as well in the London Assembly. We now know that the Met Police are going to be investigating tens of grooming gang cases. Initial data search showed that there are around 9,000 historic cases that might might fall under the board national criteria of grooming. After reviewing 2,200 of them, only 1,200 actually remained in scope. But what we know is that of course there are grooming gangs in London. Of course there are. Why would London, the biggest multicultural city of them all, the capital, be somehow immune from this disgusting crime that's largely perpetrated by a particular community of people? And I just think of the way when Susan Hall tried to challenge the London mayor over this issue, and he was pressing all of the buttons, wasn't he? The sort of, oh, wait, do you want to say who you think the perpetrators are? Go on, say it, goading her. I mean, come on, we've got to get real. This is the most abhorrent crime that anyone could imagine. When you read details of what is being done in London specifically, which is different to what is happening around the country, because in many respects it's even more grotesque and even more disgusting, vile and inhumane, if that's even possible. Again, I worry, don't just worry, I'm pretty certain that what is going on here, again, is everyone bowing down at the altar of multiculturalism and the victims, little girls.
Yeah, and not only has it happened on a fairly grand scale in London, it continues to happen. And the mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, he said it's just a disgusting disgrace, this. Susan Hall, bless her heart, doing her best to say, come on, we've got a problem here. Obviously, this is going on all over the country. 7 men were charged 2 days ago in Bristol Magistrates Court for alleged rape gang activity in Somerset, for God's sake. So don't form the misimpression that this only goes on in northern towns like Rochdale and Rotherham. It's going on all over the country. It's well known, and it's still going on. And when Susan Hall tried to press the mayor on an issue that concerns the welfare of vulnerable young girls right now being raped and tortured in this city in London, he said he started going, what do you mean? I don't know what you mean. He said, she said rape gangs, grooming gangs. Well, do you mean county lines gangs? And it's like, Sadiq, I don't know if you've been reading the papers or maybe looking at the television or listening to the radio, but there is this rape gang scandal, pretty big story. He acted like he'd never heard of it. And him pretending it's not happening in London, it's deja vu. This was the problem in the north. This was a problem in all cities where the authorities refused to accept it or pretended it wasn't happening. He's doing it again. And that is just, it's an off-the-scale scandal. It really is. Sadiq Khan, come on, get real.
I don't know how people sleep at night if they think that there's the integrity, the innocence, the health, the well-being, the sanctity of little girls is not important. How can they even sleep at night? Okay. Before I let you go, Kev, apparently Shabana Mahmood wants to scale up migrant deportations. Brilliant. She's going to turn around and say to judges, you've got to change the way you apply the ECHR. Do you think they're going to listen?
No, I don't. That's ridiculous. We have to leave the ECHR. This idea that you can sort of cherry pick bits of the ECHR that you fancy and then ignore other bits. That's just, well, she's a lawyer, for God's sake. She knows that is legally absurd. So what they're trying to say is, that bit about, human rights back in the human rights bit and, not being persecuted back in their home country. Can we just sort of not bother with that bit? Well, these tribunal judges, these left-wing Guardian reading immigration tribunal judges, they're not going to heed that instruction. They're going to carry on as they are. We need to leave the ECHR. We've got to stop this nonsense about Shabana Mahmood being hard as nails, tough as old boots, the Terminator, the Home Secretary who will finally get to grips with our migrant crisis. She is as useless and as weak as all the others. Guess what's happening today? You might be interested to know. Right now, as we speak, by 10 a.m., 200 migrants have come across the channel illegally, and they're still coming across. Storm Claudia hasn't reached the south coast yet. So on it goes, and still they come, and more of these asylum seekers are either being convicted or charged with horrific rapes and violent crimes because we're letting in thousands and thousands and thousands of young men about whom we know nothing. This is just off the scale dreadful, and Shabana Mahmood shows no sign of being able to get to grips with it at all. So forget about it, Shabs. You're just another loser.
Oh, well, do you know, I hope and pray, frankly, that she isn't, that she does manage to make some progress on this. She'd have my full-hearted support, but I'm just fed up with it. I think what we need to do is abolish #BeKind. It's the worst, most disgusting, saccharine, vacuous, ridiculous premise I've ever heard. #Get real.
Be kind, that's not in my DNA. Yeah, so it's working for me, but I agree with you.
Oh, Kev, always good to catch up with you. Thank you ever so much, my darling. And of course, tune in to Political Asylum later on. OK, we're going to take a short break now, but when we come back, we're going to catch up with that call that we had in the past hour. And if you want to add your voice to the chorus today, then do dial 0344 499 1000. I'm back after this.
In terms of your question around taxes, there are no additional tax rises needed beyond the ones that I've set out.
Don't need to increase taxes. I'm not coming back with more borrowing or more taxes.
I will not increase your national insurance. I will not increase your VAT, and I will not increase your income tax.
We don't need to come back for more. We've done that now. We've wiped the slate clean.
The economic circumstances have declined, deteriorated since a year ago. We are having to look at taxes and spending.
Across the UK, on DAB+, On YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello and welcome back, and welcome back as well to Mandy in Felixstowe. Mandy, I'm so sorry that at the end of the last hour we couldn't continue our conversation, but I really wanted to hear your story, so thank you for your patience and allowing us to call you back. Let's pick up where we left off. You were telling me, we were talking about the NHS and the pretty terrible state that it's in, and you were saying to me that recently you had to spend 4 days in A&E.
Yes, I did. On a reclining chair, waiting for a bed. They got me a bed, it disappeared, someone else had taken it, so I had to stay on the chair. But, oh, hang on. They've got me in my bed, but you'll be sat on a high-back chair. I went, I can't sit on high-back chairs. So I was still down there. Then they wanted to examine me, and they had 2 people stood in front of me, so no one could see what was going on. No curtains, no nothing.
Can you tell us, so you don't have to, of course, because whatever anybody's medical complaints are deeply personal and confidential to them, but I just want to get a picture of, you know, what you presented with and why it ended up being 4 days and how that was for you.
Well, I had to go to an appointment to have a PIC line put in my arm, and it wasn't successful. So you're then discharged from there because they couldn't do it and told to go to A&E.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd assume for those 4 days you didn't get a minute of sleep.
No. It was beyond belief. It really was. After 4 days, and I was transferred to another part of A&E because I had finally got a bed. Things didn't improve at all. The hospital I was at, I've never had a problem with. Their service has always been fantastic. But how I've been treated this time, and to have my mobile phone thrown out with the laundry, so I lost my phone as well. I finally got released. I felt like a prison. I finally got discharged Tuesday night after getting the other type of line I should have inserted.
I mean, Mandy, do you mind me being so bold as to ask you how old you are?
63.
I mean, you must feel that you've worked so hard all your life, and then to be treated in a way that you wouldn't expect to be treated in a developing world country.
I was speechless, and just to correct you, I've not worked hard all my life because the condition I've had, I was made to give up work quite a long time ago. I'm on artificial feed at home. I have to have that, and that was all to do with the lines because that's what had stopped. I have to have that. Without it, I go downhill very fast.
Oh, Mandy, I'm so sorry for what you've been through, and thank you so much for sharing your story. I wish you comfort and recovery, and thank you ever so much for calling us back. I mean, it's just one of multiple stories of people who, frankly, are not getting humane treatment in the NHS. There's a frustration of people waiting to be seen by a doctor. And you see how conditions, if they're not treated, lead on to other conditions, people being downhearted, people being demoralised. It breaks my heart to hear stories like Mandy's. Let's speak now to Sarah, who's in Somerset. Good afternoon, Sarah.
Good afternoon, Alex. I'm a huge fan of yours. So lovely to, actually talk with you.
Oh, thanks, Sarah.
No, seriously, I wish that more people would listen to you from the area that I live in, which unfortunately would rather believe the BBC than actual facts.
Oh, I know, as a Southwest girl, they seem to like... It's a political free zone down there. They seem to like things like the Liberal Democrats, which to me is a party that people pick when they don't like politics because, I don't know, the Liberal Democrats don't have politics, do they? It's just a load of people going, oh, he seems really nice, I'm going to vote for him. And normally it's because you live in a nice world where everything's all, rosy and comfortable and there aren't migrant hotels. And so it's okay, that's someone else's problem. Hashtag be kind.
Yeah, and actual facts really don't matter. I remember literally going to vote locally, and the Lib Dems sort of grabbed me at the poll station, and then I asked them a few questions, of which, the answers were ridiculous. I sort of mentioned, how our police are protecting actual criminals, and in some ways, there's so much bias going on that, if you listen to everything the BBC said, you'd believe that all the rape gang victims were responsible, and that the actual perpetrators, he said that most of the perpetrators of the rape gangs, this is a Lib Dem local guy, were actually white men.
I don't know why they insist on doing this, or they want to be a fact-free zone. But like I said, by and large, I'd be very thankful that you live in the beautiful southwest, land of cider and rolling hills, because it is one of those few places left on our little island that does seem to be relatively insulated against the horrors that happen in the rest of the country.
It is like this here, but I think that the younger generation, in many ways, they don't believe the lies anymore. It's the older people that seem to be hell-bent on holding on to lies and saying awful things like the truth. The people who actually speak the truth are very ignorant and twisted, and that, in many ways, there's a lot of very good Muslims who are stepping forward now very bravely and actually, allowing, the facts to come out. But I can't understand how someone like Sadiq Khan has got away with so much underhanded sort of almost Machiavellian type sort of leadership for so long, because there's so many sources that indicate that he is complicit and involved, yet he still stands there and he's still allowed access to taxpayers' money.
Listen, I certainly cannot evidence the fact that he may be complicit or involved. That's a strong allegation to make, and I don't want him coming after me or you, quite frankly. But, we know that the capital city is a mess. And what we can do is judge somebody by what we see of them. And certainly in that mayoral question time, he didn't shower himself in glory. Sarah, thank you for phoning me up from God's own county of Somerset. Beautiful part in the world. If you happen to be in that neck of the woods, I can highly recommend Wilkins cider. Proper stuff, that is. OK, we're going to take a short break now, but coming up after the break, wave of ISIS brides could be set to return to the United Kingdom. These are the wives of the Muslim terrorists, people like Shamima Begum, under a new UK proposal. We're going to be speaking to Andrew Drury, who's a journalist and filmmaker who has interviewed Shamima Begum on several occasions. You don't want to miss it, so don't go anywhere. I'm back after this.
across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello and welcome back to the programme. Now, this is going to send a chill down various spines, I'd imagine. The Independent Commission on UK Counter-Terrorism have said that Shamima Begum and other Britons held in Syrian detention camps, such as Al-Hol and Al-Roj, should be repatriated, warning the facilities risk being seen as Britain's Guantanamo Bay. Let's go straight now to Andrew Drury, who's a journalist and filmmaker who has interviewed Shamima Begum on several occasions. First of all, I mean, one thing I understand about the Syrian detention camps, they've largely been managed by Kurds over in Syria, who aren't exactly the best mates of the current leadership. And there's a big risk that, you know, these prisons and these camps could all sort of fall apart quite quickly. There's always been a debate over whether or not these people are our business and our responsibility if they came from our country. But you've actually been over there. You've interviewed Shamima Begum. You've seen the camps. What do you make of the idea that the wives of Muslim terrorists could soon be coming back to the United Kingdom?
Good afternoon. Well, firstly, hot off the press, Shamima started sending me text messages over the last few weeks. So I know what her current thoughts are. I can't discuss the nature of these messages, but I can tell you there is a big change in the camp because it's becoming a brick camp. But let's talk about repatriation, about floods of ISIS brides coming over. Let me tell you, they already have, and they've already started. So the people in charge of the camp have informed me and my friend that Sahara Hulain, one of the notorious terror twins, she was probably 20 times worse than Shamima. She's been released, repatriated. Firdaus Jahan, a woman I interviewed twice, she's released. She was from Richmond or Twickenham area. She's released and been repatriated. So this floods, I don't understand. It's already started. It's already happening.
Well, what's happening to these people when they get home, when they're back in the United Kingdom? Do they just get on with their lives? Are they going to face trials over here? Are they being detained? Are they being monitored?
Well, you tell me, because it's only because of my contact with administrators of that camp that I know they are released. There's not any paper coverage. There's no news coverage of it. There's no announcements. So you tell me where they are. There's no prison announcements. I don't know. I really, really, really don't know.
For crying out loud, we're bringing known violent, evil terrorists back to the United Kingdom. Then we're not being told about it, as per usual, much like the Afghan data breach leak and the number of people we're bringing from Afghanistan. We don't really know who the heck most of them are. And now we're just like, what, bringing home the good old ISIS brides to, I don't know, pull pints down the local pub. This is terrifying.
Well, it would seem shocking for myself. And obviously, the only reason I know Shamima's still there because of the messages. I can tell you about the messages. The camp is changing. They say the camp will get broken up because I've got friends from all the Kurds over there because obviously my safe passage is owed to them. And you're right, the new government and the talks they've been having with Trump over the last week or so, the Kurds are really upset. They feel they've been trodden over. And they say they'll just open the gates up and let them all out. And that's how they're feeling at the moment. You'd understand that. But as for Shamima and her thoughts on how she is at the moment, she's desperate. Her messages she sent to me, I can't discuss it on air, but because there'll be a wider story about this at some stage. She's desperate. She sees no hope. But I believe these new reports coming out will give her the hope that she's looking for.
I mean, she is the one. She became this sort of fetishized icon for the ISIS bride. You know, the burqa came off, on went the sort of fancy sunglasses, the hair that looks dyed and straightened. Lord knows how she can look so glamorous in a camp. But, you know, she became this sort of pin-up, really, where one half is going, well, you know, she was a young person, she was groomed, she's learned her way now, and she's our responsibility. And the other half going, she represents everything wrong in this world and she should never come back. But what I want to understand is how dangerous do you think these women are? Because in society, it's very easy to think, well, it's a woman. They must have been manipulated and controlled by a man. They didn't know what they're doing. They're the weaker sex. They're the compassionate gender. And you're sort of describing to me there women who have come back already, who it seems from what you were saying, I'm going to infer, you think are pretty much very dangerous people.
I spent a lot of time in Raqqa filming a documentary. I saw in the IDP camps what some of these women, remember the women were taking part of Hizbah, religious police, beating other women. So some of these women carried out some real atrocities. The rumours about Shamima and what she took part in when she was there, I mean, she's not been held there for any, she's not because she's a poster girl or whatever. Javid had information from mobile phones on what she did, so there is evidence. So I think, and also what they stood for.
Can you impart some of that to us? Are you in a position to sort of tell us what she allegedly may have done?
Well, there's witnesses in Baghouz and in Raqqa that state that she sewed suicide vests. So that's bad in itself, because obviously part of people's death, people have been blown up by this vest. Equally, she was part of Hizbah, the religious police. That's what I hear is evidence. I haven't seen the evidence myself, but people have told me that. People have witnessed Shamima carrying out acts such as with the Hizbah.
What sort of acts?
Well, you know, controlling religious police would control whether somebody's got the right clothing on, showing any ankle, praying, being in wrong places as a woman, those sort of acts. General acts that probably form of Islam would have carried out, those barbaric form. So it's done. But so I know Shamima after sort of spending 2.5 years talking to her. At first, my thoughts were that she was a radicalised young girl, and then they changed. I think that's evidence. People have heard that from me about 1 million times. But now my view hasn't changed, but it's gone back a little bit, because if she is going to be released from that prison, I think maybe we should keep control of her ourselves somehow. I really do.
Well, do you know, I've often argued the case that she remains, in my opinion, our legal responsibility, and should be locked up over here and interrogated and made to, you know, face justice. But, you know, it concerns me that there's this sort of ideal, because it's women, because it's wives, it's okay. I lived in Kenya. I know about the Westgate terror attack and the woman behind that, who was a British-born citizen who had converted to Islam, and that's one of the most bloody, vile terror attacks that's been seen in Africa. And I don't like this idea that actually these women are coming back and, oh, that means they're harmless because they're women.
No, well, that's certainly not true, because the camp is split into two halves. So inside a Roche camp, you've got a real dangerous women, the real one, they live in a different set of the camp, and they set fire to others. So these kind of wispy women that were only jihadi brides, they're setting fire to tents of other women trying to kill people in the camp. So, I mean, when I was interviewing Shamima, her next door neighbour's camp got burned down. They tried to burn her in it. So these women aren't your nice, friendly. The terror twins, one of the ones that released, that I know has been released, Sharma, the other one, still in the camp, her sister. We don't know if she's been released to Denmark or the UK, but she'll be coming to the UK for sure. She's evil, absolutely evil. She lived a reign of terror inside the camp, beating up, bullying, foul behaviour. I can't believe that anybody would repatriated her at all to any country.
And the risk, of course, is these women are hardly going to come back to Britain, suddenly find themselves westernised, in love with the British government, totally on side with UK foreign policy, less Islamist than they were before. One assumes, actually, that living within those circumstances over in Syria, if anything, might concretise some of the more radical ideologies that they already possess.
Well, we all assume these have been de-radicalised, these girls. We somehow assume it, but how do we know how much extremity they went through with ISIS, and how maybe they're sleeper cells? And it sounds bizarre, but they still, it's easy to, I mean, Shamima is the greatest manipulator on earth. She manipulated me. I'd admit that. And that manipulation taken into that small, wispy kind of shy character, which I did, and then turns out this diva, very clever in the way she is. She could, you know, any of these girls could be hiding the same beliefs. And anyway, everybody's got it wrong. They all say 3 girls went, but it was 4. The fourth girl, still very much alive, living inside Syria. Her name's Shamima Begum. Similar name. She's still out there spouting out rubbish at this moment about the UK, and she's still alive.
It terrifies me. Andrew, thank you ever so much for, for your candour, brilliant journalism, to be able to share those stories with us, and how terrifying. You know, don't you? We all know. Whether it's people coming over after the Afghan data breach, whether it's the Taliban charging people in Afghanistan to write these letters that, suggest that they're going to be persecuted in order that they can get entrance into the United Kingdom, whether it's people breaking into the country illegally, whether it's the repatriation of ISIS brides, we all know the danger in our midst, that the enemy is inside the gate. And what's more, it seems the UK government just opens the gate far and wide and says, come on in. We don't care if you pose a threat. We'll deal with it. Bad times are ahead. Right, we're going to take a short break now, but quelle surprise! In a book about ancient people in Scotland, a children's book about the origins of the country called Carved in Stone, a storyteller's guide to the Picts, an illustrated history of the tribes who lived in eastern and northern Scotland from around 2070 to 900 AD. Well, quelle surprise, it turns out that a lot of these people were black. Oh, we're going to be catching up with Conor Tomlinson, writer at Courage Media, after the break.
In terms of your question around taxes, there are no additional tax rises needed beyond the ones that I've set out.
Don't need to increase taxes. I'm not coming back with more borrowing or more taxes.
I will not increase your national insurance. I will not increase your VAT, and I will not increase your income tax.
We don't need to come back for more. We've done that now. We've wiped the slate clean.
The economic circumstances have declined, deteriorated since a year ago. We are having to look at taxes and spending.
Across the UK, DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Oh, if you went down to a school library in deep Scotland and wanted to find a kiddie's book on the history of that country, you might come across a book called Carved in Stone, A Storyteller's Guide to the Picts, which is an illustrated history of the tribes who lived in eastern and northern Scotland from around 270 to 900 AD. This is aimed apparently at children aged 14 and up, with cartoons of the Picts, where, well, let's just say that they were a diverse lot according to this particular book. Let's speak now to Connor Tomlinson. He's a writer at Courage Media. I mean, look, it is not beyond the wildest of imaginations that there might have been tribes in semi-ancient Scotland. This is, of course, AD, not BC. Who might have had a variety of different complexions and hair colours. But the idea that they might be black seems to me a bit of a stretch.
Yeah, it turns out that Hamza Yusuf and Nana Sarwar were just mad this entire time because white Scots had stolen Scotland from the original Scots, apparently. Alex, yeah, it is actually beyond the realm of possibility that the Picts and other tribes indigenous to the British Isles were sub-Saharan Africans, because we do have DNA data from the time where, especially in Scotland, where it's quite chilly and a bit drizzly, if you have very dark skin, as the characters in this book are depicted, you won't get your vitamin D unless you're eating an awful lot of shellfish. So you actually do need to have pale skin in order to receive your prerequisite level of sunlight to get your vitamin D, which is why we've evolved to be so pale and often fairer haired than the rest of the world where we go on holiday where it's quite sunny. Also, and this is anthropologist Tom Rousel has done a very good documentary on Cheddar Man before, you know, the Mesolithic British body that was found in Cheddar Gorge, and they made a sculpture of him and they said, see, we've made the sculpture with dark skin, therefore everyone was dark skinned. It turns out that he probably would have had light blue eyes from the Western hunter-gatherers, the DNA that you would have got from there, and again, the people from that era would have had paler skin over time to absorb some of the sun. And we know this because right round the corner is his direct ancestor from his matrilineal side, who just so happens to be a history teacher in Somerset, and he's very pale and ginger. So unless there was a serious genetic change from between these Picts, who look like something out of the BBC's depiction of the Anglo-Saxons and King and Conqueror, to the modern-day incarnation of Cheddar Man, who is just a slightly bit paler complexion than Milk, then I think this might be a load of nonsense.
What I don't understand is, what are they trying to do by this revisionist exercise in changing people's ethnicity? A similar book was written on St Augustine, who is a Christian saint who came from Northern Africa, that we know. But look, I know a thing or two about Northern Africa. I've been there plenty of times. I also know a thing or two about human evolution, and he would have most likely been an Algerian Berber, which as an ethnic group, I can tell you right now, largely have fairish hair, light complexion, and not always have dark eyes. And why is it that when, you know, one hand they point and go, well, it's a global minority. Ooh, the global minority. A phrase I hate because it almost sounds a bit like, give it a few more years and they won't exist anymore. Why is it that if we're a global minority, which we are indigenous to these northern cooler islands, why all of a sudden they're trying to tell people that somehow, by some sort of freak of nature, we all used to be black but somehow got all white? Why? What is the purpose of this?
Yeah, this has been going on for quite some time, Alex. I mean, when I went to school, there were GCSE poems by the likes of Benjamin Zephaniah, or poems like Checking Out Me History, which had implied the history curriculum was secretly burying the fact that it was littered with black heroes held back by white people, and that actually the history of the British Isles is not telling the truth about the fact that, as Horrible Histories once said, we've been here from the start. The implication being that Indigenous Brits were always black. So there's two reasons for this. The first is to create a narrative that co-opts the successes of history For example, the idea that the Egyptians were sub-Saharan Africans, rather than looking a bit like modern-day Mediterraneans, because they want to annex to their resentful narrative about colonialism and racism and historical oppression the successes of other civilizations to prove that the failures of present civilizations are not the fault of those civilizations, their economic models, their cultures, their government corruption. Instead, it's all the fault of white people who have secretly hid the history from them, and if only they weren't under the yoke of colonialism and racism, then they would be Wakanda from Black Panther. And then the other thing, of course, is to rewrite our history so that we can't make any claims to indigeneity to our land to then argue as a ethnic group, a political constituency in whose interest the government should act against mass migration, against multiculturalism. Because the argument will be, well, actually, you were always black, and so you don't have an argument against importing the whole of India or sub-Saharan Africa or take your pick as part of the Boris wave. And so it's a particularly insidious gaslighting attempt that isn't working, but unfortunately, it has worked to a degree where, I don't know if you saw the YouGov polling from this week, a majority of people in the country say that you don't need to be of pale complexion, white, to be English. It's not a moral statement to say that British people, as in the indigenous tribes, the Anglos, the Saxons, the Celts, the Jutes, even the Normans for the 1,000 years between then and now, where we've been a majority white country and all mixed, English people, Scottish, Welsh and Irish, are of white complexion. And just as if I didn't put on a dress, it wouldn't make me a woman. If I put on samurai armor, I wouldn't become Japanese. And that is not a moral statement about any of our friends of foreign extraction who happen to live here, belong to our families, mix in our friendship circles, that come from a different place. But we must be clear about the categories that do exist. There are indigenous peoples of the British Isles, and no, they do not come from the Horn of Africa.
Connor, I love you to bits. I love the way you were able to vocalise what is such a thorny and complex and taboo topic with such grace and intelligence. Thank you ever so much, Mr. Tomlinson. Oh, look, Ian,
you never said that
the
about me,
Sub-Saharan has just wandered into the studio. Hello. I mean, it's just a madness, isn't it? But, you know, Connor was making an interesting point, because now you've got this sort of convergence of everyone going, well, the Jews are all white, it's whiteism, it's colonialism. And having just come back from Israel, it's like, oh, yeah, what about the Ethiopian Jews and the Arab Jews and the North African Jews?
Iranian Jews.
Yeah. It's just this, it's a crazy world.
It's a funny old world, but thank goodness we have, great political operators in this country like Rachel Reeves. I mean, she's so good.